They weren't supposed to exist. Bones too long for any human frame. Skulls too narrow, too perfect. Pipes buried inside a sealed mountain cave. Metal that shouldn't even survive time. And then an engine, frozen deep beneath the ice. No vehicle, no origin, no explanation. Old maps sketching continents that never appeared. A mirror polished by hands that shouldn't have known how. A tower that swallows every sound you make. And a child barely speaking who remembered cities that history forgot. These aren't tales from science fiction. They were found, recorded, then quietly buried again. Tonight we dig them back up. Artifacts from something older, tranger, maybe wiser. Something that doesn't fit anywhere in our timeline. You're not here to solve them. Just listen. Let the mystery carry you. And if one of these makes your heart pause, makes you feel that quiet chill, leave a comment. I'll be right there, in the dark, reading with you. Just another scientific group with ground-penetrating radar, drilling instruments, and insulated tents pitched against the biting cold of a glacier that hadn't fully melted in thousands of years. The team was halfway through their planned core samples, when one of the radar pulses returned something strange. Perfect set of echoes. Not organic. Not ice. Not rock. Something solid. Uniform. Repeating. At first they assumed it was a mistake. A false return. A piece of buried equipment from another expedition, perhaps. But the coordinates didn't match any old paths. And it was too deep. They started drilling. 6 meters down, their tools struck metal. What emerged next made no sense. It looked like an engine block. Heavy, dense, blackened. Parts of it fused together, others neatly separate, intact though clearly ancient. It had pistons, interlocking gears, a framework that suggested rotation. It even had what appeared to be a burn chamber and nozzles. But there were no markings, no labels, no known fuel connections, and no vehicle. It was an engine, but for what? They transported it to a secure lab. There, a team of metallurgists, engineers, and archaeologists gathered around it like priests around a sacred relic. Carbon dating was impossible, the piece was inorganic. So they examined the ice it had been found in instead. The layer it came from hadn't melted in at least 10,000 years. That made it older than agriculture, older than writing. The materials were even stranger. The outer casing was some alloy, undocumented in any modern system, high in molybdenum and tungsten, but fused with microcrystalline carbon in a way we've never replicated. Even under electron microscopes, it showed zero corrosion. The bearings were still smooth. The piston chambers moved freely. Despite being frozen in solid ice for millennia, the engine hadn't rusted. It hadn't degraded, it just waited. But it was only a part. There were no wheels, no fuselage, no vehicle body, just the core, as if whatever it powered had vanished or never existed. Some theorized it had been part of a flying device. Others suggested a stationary engine, maybe part of an ancient facility. But none of those theories explained the isolation. The glacier had sealed it completely. No surrounding debris, no signs of life, just the engine, perfectly preserved. Then came the internal scan. Inside the block, engineers found channels like veins carved with mathematical precision. They weren't for oil or coolant. These channels followed fractal patterns, expanding and narrowing, according to what appeared to be a prime number-based sequence. The structure wasn't just functional, it was optimized, built with knowledge that would take modern engineers years to even model. Even stranger, several parts were modular. They weren't welded. They were locked with interlocking shapes, almost like puzzle pieces, allowing them to be disassembled and reassembled by hand. But when separated, the pieces showed microscopic teeth, like they had been cut using diamond tools. Yet there were no tool marks, no hammering, no welding, no signs of forging. Just precision beyond anything known in the ancient world. And then came the etching. Hidden inside one of the smaller side chambers, beneath a rotating they found it, a small engraving, just a few millimeters wide. Not letters, not numbers, but symbols. Geometric, repeating, arranged in a spiral pattern that led to a central dot. The pattern matched petroglyphs found in Bolivia, thousands of miles away. Symbols carved into mountain walls, believed to be ceremonial, but those carvings had no known connection to machinery, until now. So how did a mechanical object, one that required high-heat metallurgy, advanced machining, and likely a power source, end up buried deep beneath a glacier with no matching technology around it? The most conservative theory suggests an unknown culture with a burst of technological advancement that never spread. A tribe that discovered metallurgy but collapsed before reaching the Bronze Age. But that doesn't explain the complexity, it doesn't explain the materials. Some suggest it was dropped or left by a traveler. Not from the stars, but a lost culture. One that mastered machinery before history remembered them. An Atlantis, a Lemuria, a civilization whose timeline we erased when the last ice age swallowed everything north. But there's another theory, one they don't publish. What if the engine was never part of this world? What if it was a test component, something deployed briefly for observation or sampling? What if it was never meant to be found? An implant left in the earth like a black box, a data recorder, a dormant mechanism awaiting reactivation. After all, when the team returned to the glacier site a year later, hoping to find more parts, more wreckage, more proof, the anomaly was gone. The ice was still there, the coordinates the same, but the radar showed nothing. They rescanned dozens of times, drilled, sampled, no returns, no signals. The space where the engine had been was solid ice, untouched. The only proof it had ever been there was the engine itself. Now under lockdown in a private research lab, inaccessible to the public, no images released, no press, just rumors from anonymous sources who claim to have seen it, who describe it not just as a machine, but as something alive. Not in the biological sense, but in its complexity. In the way it reacts subtly to heat, to pressure, to EM waves. One researcher claimed its internal geometry shifts slightly under a magnetic field, that it's not a static object, but something adaptive, responsive, waiting, but for what? And if it was just one piece, where is the rest? The child born with memories of the old world. He was 4 years old when the drawings began. Nothing unusual at first, just the kind of crude stick figures any child might make. But then came shapes that didn't match any cartoon or storybook. Symbols that resembled ancient scripts, floor plans, diagrams, cityscapes no modern mind could recognize. His parents thought it was a phase, a strange one, but harmless until he started naming places that didn't exist. He'd sit on the floor with crayons and draw coastlines, not ones you'd find on a map today. These showed strange continents, surrounded by walls of mountains, and bordered by lush inland seas. He'd name them out loud in languages that no one taught him. His mother recorded one of these sessions and sent it to a local university, more out of curiosity than concern. But the linguistic professor who received it didn't laugh. He forwarded it to colleagues in ancient studies. The speech patterns, though fragmented and spoken by a child, bore resemblance to a dead tongue, one found carved into stones in only a few disputed archaeological digs. Not Egyptian, not Sumerian. Older, less complete. One of those scripts had been discovered on a stone tablet buried in Anatolia. Only 3 symbols had ever been translated. The child spoke all 3 and then more. When asked how he knew, he answered simply, "I lived there." He said he remembered falling, not from a building, from the sky. He said the sky cracked, and everything was light. And when he woke up again, it was different, slower, the sun wrong, the people strange. When they showed him pictures of ancient architecture, his reactions were consistent. Some he dismissed immediately, too new, he'd say. Others he stared at for minutes without speaking. Then he would point to things the researchers hadn't noticed, a missing stairwell, a blocked-off chamber, a collapsed dome that had never been recorded. One researcher secretly submitted one of the boy's architectural sketches to a structural engineering firm, posing it as a creative concept. The firm returned a short note: the design used gravity to power internal systems. It shouldn't work, but mathematically it might. And then there were the maps. The boy once drew a city he called Erelin. It was circular, 5 walls deep, water ran in rings through its streets. When asked where it was, he tapped a place near present-day Tunisia. That land is desert now, but in satellite imaging taken during early oil explorations, a circular pattern was faintly visible beneath the sand, buried, forgotten. The child claimed it sank not in water but in time. The most unnerving moment came when he was shown a globe. He spun it once and stopped it with his finger on Antarctica. Then with a crayon he drew a shape there, not Iceland, flat and green, a valley, he said, with towers made of shining stone. He said that's where he had studied the stars, that's where he learned about the machines, that's where he heard the singing from the sky. He's 13 now, the memories come less often. He no longer draws the towers or the maps. He doesn't speak the language, but sometimes in his sleep, he mutters names no one can trace, and his hands still move as if drawing in the air. No one knows how to explain it. There is no known disorder that accounts for it. No therapy has erased it. No lie detector test has caught him inventing anything. He simply remembers and then, slowly, forgets. The alien skeletons of Mount Baigong. In the quiet stretches of western China, where the Kuetong Basin meets the lonely foothills of Mount Baigong, lies a cave that has puzzled scientists and mystics alike. At first glance, there is little here to capture attention. Dry earth, dusty winds, distant mountains standing still in the silence. But inside this cave, sealed off for years, is something no one has ever fully explained. Metallic pipes embedded in the rock walls, a strange network of tubes that seem too ancient for their design, and bones not quite human, not quite animal. Chinese researchers first visited this cave after local legends spread of lights in the sky and strange sightings around the area. But it was what they found inside that began to challenge understanding. Some of the pipes ran deep into the mountain, others reached toward the nearby saltwater lake, as if meant to transport something, water maybe, or something else. The pipes didn't match anything local. They weren't carved stone. They were actual tubes, many of them hollow, some branching at odd angles. Their material was unlike anything that should have existed in a remote cave. When scientists analyzed fragments, they found traces of ferric oxide, silicon dioxide, calcium oxide, even rare elements that shouldn't naturally form together. Some of the pipes were dated to be thousands of years old, yet showed signs of smelting metalwork, at a time when no known civilization in the region had that technology. Then came the bones, partially fossilized, some humanoid, but others longer limbs, strange proportions. There were whispers that the bones were not human at all. No DNA was ever released to the public. Some claimed the research was halted. Others believed it was buried on purpose. The local legend speaks of a sky palace, a place once visited by beings from the stars. They came, stayed for a time, and then left. The pipes, some believe, are the remnants of that lost system. As if the cave was once a base, connected to the lake, using the mineral-rich water for energy or life support. It's just a theory, but there's no record of how the pipes were made, or why they seem to align with each other underground like a planned structure. Some Chinese archaeologists insisted it could be a natural formation, a result of iron-rich magma seeping through fissures, yet even they admitted the angles were too precise, too consistent. Photographs of the site were once available, but many have since disappeared. The cave itself was closed to public access. No major study has been published in decades. Even Chinese media that once explored the mystery went silent, and those who tried to dig deeper found their questions unanswered. Still, locals speak of flickering lights in the sky, of strange metallic sounds coming from deep within the mountain at night, and of dreams shared by multiple villagers, of tall figures with glowing eyes wandering near the lake. No one knows for sure what Mount Baigong is. Was it an ancient alien base, a natural anomaly, or something in between, something that leaves behind no answers, only evidence that shouldn't be there at all? In the silence of the cave, among the dry winds and forgotten stones, the bones still lie hidden, the pipes still rest in the rock, and whatever truth they hold remains buried beneath layers of dust, secrecy, and time. The sword they couldn't reforge. It was found buried beneath a forgotten battlefield, its blade still sharp, its surface dark, almost black, not rusted, not dulled, and not like anything expected from the Viking Age. When scientists studied it, they were stunned because every modern attempt to recreate it failed. The temperature, the purity, the carbon content, it all defied the era. This was a sword that wasn't supposed to exist. They called it the Ulfbert, and though many swords bear that name, etched into the blade with a cross on each side, only a few are real. Only a handful contain the secret that makes this sword so strange. Crucible steel. Pure, flexible, hard. A metal that shouldn't have been possible in 9th century Europe. The Vikings weren't supposed to have this kind of metallurgy. They were seafarers, warriors, craftsmen, yes, but not blacksmiths of futuristic materials. Yet someone among them, somewhere, did the impossible. Over 170 Ulfbert swords have been found across Europe, but most are fakes, imitations, made with slag-filled brittle iron. The real ones, only a few, shine with high-carbon steel, and a clean, even inscription, Love ULF Bert. No errors, no reversed letters, just precision, discipline, and mystery. To make this kind of steel, a blacksmith would need to reach 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, maintain that temperature, remove all impurities, control the carbon content to just the right level. That means sealed crucibles, advanced furnace design, refining knowledge, all of it lost to time. So how did they do it? Did the Vikings trade for this metal? Could it have come from Persia, where crucible steel woods was already in use? Were small amounts carried along ancient silk roads, reaching northern Europe in secret? Or did someone in Europe rediscover a forgotten process, a lost Roman method, an old world recipe that only one guild or family knew? And if so, why did it vanish? Why is there no trace of the forges, no written instructions, no continuation of the inscriptions suggest branding, a trademark, like today's elite weapons manufacturers, which means people knew the name, they wanted ULF Bert, but only a few could deliver the real thing, the rest copied it, poorly, desperately. That's the strangest part. This wasn't legend or lore, it's real steel. Tested, measured, proven. But when modern blacksmiths tried to recreate it with period-accurate tools, they couldn't. Only with modern tech could they get close, and even then, the impurity pattern didn't match. The originals had less slog, better distribution, cleaner chemistry. It's not just a fluke, it's knowledge, and maybe it was protected, hidden, suppressed. Some theories say monasteries held control over medieval metalwork, that secretive orders might have owned or buried the knowledge. Others think the smiths simply died out, took the method to their graves. Then come the fringe theories. Some suggest the ULF Bert's origin wasn't European at all, that the blade design and metallurgy echo ancient Chinese or Tibetan styles, that maybe, just maybe, this sword was a relic from a much older source. A civilization long forgotten, or something not of this world. That theory remains unsupported, but the question lingers, why can't we replicate it exactly? Why now, with everything we know, can't we reproduce a sword made by people from 1,000 years ago? We can make similar blades, yes, but not identical, not with the same clarity of metal, not with the same purity. So the ULF Bert sits in museums, shining softly in glass cases. A weapon, a relic, a question. It doesn't come with stories of gods. No curses, no alien inscriptions, just a name and a silence that never quite lifts. And when you stare at that blade and realize what it means, what it shouldn't be able to do, you might begin to understand why some call it a glitch in history, a message in metal that says we once knew more than we remember and maybe we lost it on purpose. Discs that told a 12,000-year-old crash story. Stone records speak of a starship falling from the sky and being buried in Tibet. It started like any quiet expedition. 1938, deep in the Bayanhar Mountains, where the cold bites and the wind never stops. A Chinese archaeology team led by Professor Chi Pute was exploring caves on the border between China and Tibet. No satellites, no drones, just notebooks, brushes, and hope. They were expecting old rock. What they found erased the line between myth and history. Inside the caves, discs, hundreds of stone discs, round and flat, with a hole in the center. Some cracked, some perfectly preserved, each one carved with a fine spiral groove, stretching from the center to the rim. They looked like phonograph records, but the grooves weren't scratches, they were something else. Symbols, tiny, precise, and so intricate, they were almost invisible without magnification. A spiral language no one could recognize, etched in stone. Over 700 of these discs were uncovered, later called the Drapa stones. There were no temples nearby, no statues, no cultural markings like Buddhist caves or imperial tombs, just bones, small skeletons, thin, delicate, massive heads, not ape, not fully human, no matching ancestry. The discs were boxed, ignored, filed away in dusty corners of museums. They didn't match any known script, not Chinese, Tibetan, or Sanskrit, so they waited, silent, for someone to listen. That someone came decades later. Dr. Sumam Nui, a linguist. He studied the discs for years, and what he decoded was unlike anything ever found on Earth. The inscriptions told a story. Not a myth, not a ritual, but a crash. A ship that fell from the sky 12,000 years ago. Its occupants, the Drapa, couldn't repair it. They took shelter in the caves. The locals feared them, hunted them, but later grew to understand. The Drapa were peaceful. Their children lived and died in those same caves, and the discs were their record. A message for whoever might come next. The academic world refused to publish it, too strange, too dangerous. Dr. Sum faded from public view. Some say he was silenced, others claim he never existed. But the story spread underground, and the discs, they were real. In the 1990s, Austrian engineer Ernst Wieger visited the Bampo Museum in Xi'an. He claimed to see 2 Drapa discs. He photographed them, round stone plates with spiraled grooves. When he returned, the discs were gone. Museum staff said they never existed. Other researchers tested similar discs. Russian scientist Vyacheslav Sisev found strange things. Some discs emitted faint charges, they resonated under pressure, they had high cobalt content, unusual for stone. Something about them didn't feel natural, but the trail would go cold again. Researchers silenced, discs vanished, caves closed, then the skeletons. Still unclassified, no DNA match with Han Chinese, Tibetans, or Mongols. Massive skulls, shallow graves, like they were buried in haste, like they weren't supposed to die there. Later surveys found strange pipe-like structures near the caves, iron tubes embedded in solid rock. Leading from cave entrances to a nearby lake, tens of thousands of years old, no ancient culture should have been able to forge iron, let alone pipe it through mountains. The lake itself showed high concentrations of rare earth elements, as if something mechanical had once operated there. And nearby people, a small isolated tribe, the Drapa, not like anyone else genetically. Orally they passed down a legend of visitors from the sky. Small, large-headed, stranded, accepted genetic drift, maybe altitude adaptation, possibly. But their story has lasted thousands of years, and it sounds less like folklore and more like a report. Why spiral grooves? Why microscopic writing? Why such precision? And why would an ancient tribe carve their entire survival story in stone? Unless they believed it mattered. Skeptics point to hoax. No academic papers, no photos in mainstream journals. They say Dr. Tsum was fiction, that this is Cold War propaganda. But Soviet and Chinese scientists took the discs seriously. The photos match. The discs existed, then disappeared. So we're left with echoes. Bones that don't match history. Pipes older than forges. Stones that whisper in spirals. And a mountain that won't stop hiding secrets. If it's a hoax, it's perfect. If it's true, then our timeline is broken because this wasn't just a crash, it was contact. And the discs may be the only record we have of what happened next. Not a warning, not a myth, but a message, carved in stone, waiting to be understood. The Stargate carved into solid rock. In the remote, windswept highlands of southern Peru, surrounded by towering sandstone cliffs and rugged silence, there's a place that doesn't belong. Not to modern Peru, not even to the known ancient world. Set into a sheer rock face near Lake Titicaca is something that looks like a doorway but isn't. It goes nowhere. It leads to nothing. It stands quietly, carved into the stone wall like it was meant to open, but never did. Or maybe it already has. The locals call it Puerta de Hayumarca, the Gate of the Gods. It's a flat vertical rock wall, stretching more than 7 meters across and about 7 meters high. In its center is a recessed, T-shaped indentation, like a doorway within a doorway. The outer frame is wide and tall, while the inner cutout is human-sized, but too narrow and too deep to serve any functional purpose. It has no hinges, no inscriptions, and no signs of decoration. Just clean, crisp lines carved into solid sandstone, as if someone was more concerned with precision than artistry. What puzzles archaeologists is not just how it was made, but why. There's no city nearby, no temple, no ruins that explain its purpose. Most megalithic structures are built for something: religious ceremonies, burial sites, defense, astronomical alignment. But this doorway seems to serve no such function. It sits in silence, detached from everything. A feature with no context, but it's the legends that bring this place to life. According to Andean myths, this was not just a symbolic portal, but a literal one, used by the gods to enter and exit our world. One tale speaks of a priest named Oromu Muru, a guardian of ancient knowledge, who fled the Inca Empire during the time of Spanish conquest. With him, he carried a golden disc known as the Key of the Gods of the Seven Rays. Chased by soldiers and desperate to protect the object, he arrived at the stone gate. As the story goes, the key activated the doorway. A shimmering tunnel of blue light appeared, and Oromu Muru stepped through, vanishing forever. The golden key has never been found, and many assume the story is myth, invented to preserve cultural identity during colonization. But there's something about the site that continues to attract curiosity, not just from historians or tourists, but from people who say the site itself feels different. Some visitors report dizziness or the sensation of being pulled forward. Others feel vibrations in the rock when standing within the cutout. A few even claim to have had dreams after visiting, of distant stars, ancient beings, or strange symbols that don't match any known language. One researcher noted that electronic devices occasionally malfunction near the site, as if some subtle energy interferes with signals. Whether these experiences are psychological or something more, no one can say for certain. What's even more mysterious is that the style of the carving does not match traditional Inca stonework. The Incas were known for their complex interlocking masonry, stone blocks cut with such precision that even a razor blade couldn't fit between them. But this isn't blocks, it's a single, vast, smooth carving. And there's no clear sign of tool marks. Some theorists speculate it predates the Inca entirely, that it may be the work of a civilization we don't know or barely remember. And then there's the location. The Stargate lies near Lake Titicaca, one of the most enigmatic lakes on Earth. It's the highest navigable lake in the world, and was deeply sacred to the Inca, who believed it was the birthplace of the sun. Beneath its waters, archaeologists have found remnants of submerged structures, ancient walls, and signs of civilizations that may have existed long before recorded history. The proximity of this doorway to such a powerful and ancient site raises even more questions. Is it possible this was part of something much larger, a forgotten city? A ceremonial complex built to honor something or someone beyond human understanding. Some even connect the structure to global myths of stargates or ancient portals. Across the world, from Egypt to Mesopotamia to the American Southwest, similar symbols appear, gateways cut into stone, always alone, always silent. Were these shared ideas or shared technology? And if so, shared by whom? No one's been able to answer these questions definitively. Excavations around the site are limited. The region is protected and sacred to the Aymara people who live nearby. They believe the site still holds power and should not be disturbed. Some even warn that opening the gate, if it ever could be opened, would not be wise. And so it remains, an ancient doorway, carved into unyielding stone, a mystery that refuses to explain itself. It's not just the strangeness of its design or the legends tied to it that make it so compelling. It's the complete absence of context. The way it appears with no warning, the way it refuses to belong to any culture, yet still exists as if it's waiting. And the question lingers in the back of the mind, if someone once used it to leave, could someone also use it to return? The chamber below the ice that no one claimed. Satellite scans reveal a massive structure under Antarctica. No one knows who built it. In the quiet vastness of Antarctica, beyond all human reach, lies a world of silence and ice, so thick it hides secrets older than human memory. At over 2 miles depth, the ice sheet has preserved anything it covered. But recently satellite scans began to show something unexpected. Nearly 200 feet across, irregular in shape, yet unmistakably geometric, lines so straight they didn't belong to natural crevasses. Angles too precise, a form like a carved chamber beneath vast fields of snow. It all began in 2015, when a research team requested high-resolution SR synthetic aperture radar data for other reasons. What they found instead was an anomaly, a large dome-like shape, partially obscured by layers of ice. When viewed from different passes, the structure remained consistent, not shifting, not collapsing. It seemed unmoving, unchanged, deliberately frozen in place. Geologists offered explanations: an enormous subglacial lake, a volcanic cavity, a lava tube. One even suggested it could be a natural geothermal dome, but the heat signature was low and consistent, not the sort seen in volcanoes or geothermal vents. This was something different, gentle warmth, enough to suggest something sealed inside. When the news spread, the scientific community hesitated. Nobody wanted to be associated with conspiracy theories. Lab coats don't look good next to wild ideas. So the anomaly was quietly set aside, mentioned in minor footnotes, then dropped entirely. Still, independent satellite analysts continued to study the images. They noted a ring of radial tunnels leading off the main dome, straight corridors, branching like spokes from a wheel. They looked too regular to be natural, yet no country or agency claimed responsibility. No research station near that sector. No known research was taking place. Then there's the Piri Reis map, the 16th century Turkish creation, showing parts of a then-unknown Antarctic coastline, ice-free, now buried beneath kilometers of ice. Who mapped that coast? And why did it align so eerily with the newly discovered structure? Beyond theory, no one knows what's inside. Some say the chamber is hollow. Others argue the ice has filled it with layered sediment over centuries. Explorers who have ventured nearby reported equipment failures, white noise on radios, compass needles spinning, GPS systems blinking in and out, as if the structure resists being mapped. In 2018, a tech billionaire funded a clandestine expedition. They flew drones outfitted with heat sensors. They dropped ice-penetrating sonar equipment. Their findings hinted at open space beneath the dome, an entrance maybe 3 meters high, long corridors leading into darkness. They also reported cracking sounds, a slow creaking echo, as if the ice shield was reacting to an internal structure. But when the team returned home, their footage was locked away. Their satellite data was allegedly classified. Since then, the anomaly has become part scientific mystery, part urban legend. Some propose it's a refugee vault, built to protect humanity from extinction events. Others whisper of alien architecture, a gateway intended for visitors from beyond our world. None of these ideas have proof, but the ice doesn't lie, the chamber is real. Whether made by glaciers or architects, by Earth or extraterrestrials, it remains. If it is man-made, who built it, and why? When Antarctica was covered in ice and no humans lived there, if it is natural, why does it resemble nothing on Earth? Why maintain such symmetry? Governments don't acknowledge it. They don't want people rummaging in Antarctica. They don't want tourists. They don't want answers. So for now, the hole in the ice remains, a silent sentinel beneath the ice sheet, waiting for someone to go deeper, to ask the question again, to stand inside the unknown, and decide what this place really is. Because Antarctica doesn't exist on maps alone. It holds secrets, and this chamber is one of the loudest whispers in the silence. The robot blueprints hidden in a temple wall. The temple stood in silence, its stone walls worn smooth by centuries of monsoon rain and sweltering sun. Somewhere in the deeper sanctum, behind ornate carvings and walls blackened by oil lamps, lay a panel almost forgotten. It wasn't meant to be noticed, just another part of the temple's intricate design. But one quiet morning, in the early 20th century, a visiting researcher noticed something strange in the carvings. These were not gods, not animals, not scenes of ritual, they were schematics. At least they looked like schematics. Diagrams, blueprints even. Thin lines crisscrossing each other with measured precision. Intersecting nodes, circular cores, tubes, joints. Something that looked like a mechanical limb. Another like a rotating joint. Wheels, pistons. Even what seemed eerily close to a humanoid figure. Its arms outstretched, its head squared off with gears carved around its neck. The temple, believed to have been built over 1,000 years ago, is in the southern part of India. Its outer walls are adorned with typical temple art, mythology, flora, and animals. But this panel didn't match. The carving style was sharper, more geometric. Like it was added by a different hand in a different time. But when the carving was dated, the rock had no anomalies, no signs of tampering, no newer chisels. It was original to the wall. The figure etched into the granite was humanoid, but not human. It had jointed arms, block-like feet, and two circular objects at the shoulders that didn't seem biological. There was something unsettling about its face. Not demonic, not godlike, just expressionless. Like a diagram meant to explain, not worship. Was it a metaphor? A divine chariot? A symbolic representation of a myth lost to time? Those were the early guesses. But the more archaeologists and engineers looked, the less symbolic it seemed. Each line had purpose. Each joint looked functional. This wasn't the work of an artist improvising a divine concept. It was the work of someone documenting, someone recording, someone showing what they had seen or imagined. Hidden in nearby niches, there were other fragments. Small symbols beneath the carving, etched in Old Tamil or perhaps Sanskrit, but the words were fragmented, worn. One phrase seemed to appear repeatedly though, Nali Kinaru, a term loosely translating to self-operating well. Some scholars believe this might have referred to a mechanical pump, a water device, but others believe it meant something else entirely. One professor from Bengaluru, who had been studying early Indian automatons, found uncanny similarities between the carving and descriptions in ancient texts. In particular, the Samarangana Sutradhara, a Sanskrit treatise written around the 11th century, describes mechanical beings in surprising detail. These weren't metaphorical beings of legend. They were mechanical guards, doorway sentinels built to respond to intrusions, capable of movement. Even more astonishing, the text explained how these constructs were to be assembled, the internal compartments, the materials needed, how bellows and mercury were used. Mercury, a metal with strange qualities. Liquid, reflective, volatile. A substance ancient cultures across the world seemed obsessed with. The scholar cross-referenced the carving in the temple wall with descriptions from the treatise, and many elements aligned. The shoulder mechanisms, the rotary limbs, even the hollowed-out trunk area described as a reservoir of vital essence. And suddenly, the carving wasn't just strange, it was consistent, detailed, mechanical. But who would have carved it, and more urgently, why? There are no known records of robots in ancient India. No discovered remnants of functioning machines, no fragments of ancient motors or gears. But time and climate are harsh. Organic materials vanish. Metal corrodes. Even the pyramids lost their casing stones. So, could a device once existed here? Was this panel a kind of instruction manual? A memory encoded in stone? Or was it a dream, a concept so advanced that its creator could only preserve it in symbols? Some suggest it may have been inspired by visitors. Not divine beings, but perhaps real beings whose form inspired myth and machine alike. The depiction of humanoid figures with unusual heads, or the frequent use of vehicles descending from the sky in Indian epics, adds fuel to the idea that ancient India was not merely imagining, but documenting. What's more, the temple's location lies on a fault line of other mysteries. Nearby, copper plates with unfamiliar etchings have been found. Some claim they resemble circuit diagrams. Others say they are mere decorations. But the resemblance is unsettling. Could these plates, the panel, and the texts all be echoes of a long-lost age of machine-making? Further out, in Odisha and Andhra Pradesh, there are local legends of statues that once moved, that once spoke, in most cases, dismissed as religious exaggeration. But perhaps there was something behind the stories. Mechanical puppets like those seen in early Islamic and Chinese engineering? Perhaps knowledge shared between ancient cultures? One final note from a more recent expedition. When the panel was scanned with ground-penetrating radar, something curious was found behind it. A hollow space, small, square, like a sealed vault. It hasn't been opened. The temple authorities fear damaging the structure, and perhaps they're afraid of what they might find. Could it be empty? Could it be filled with offerings? Could it hold the remnants of a device lost to time? Or worse, could it confirm the unthinkable? That once, long ago, someone had carved the memory of a machine because they had seen one, and they wanted to make sure we never forgot. A city designed for giants and no one else. Beneath the highlands of eastern Anatolia, near the soft, windswept hills of modern-day Turkey, lies something that doesn't quite fit the human story. Not because it's too small to notice or too buried to understand, but because everything inside it is too big. This place isn't one of those grand temples or towering palaces. It's quiet. It's tucked away beneath the surface. And yet, whoever built it didn't just carve out a home. They carved out a world scaled far beyond what anyone could logically explain. We're talking staircases 3 times taller than a human step, door frames you could drive a truck through, tables and benches carved directly into the stone, but too large and too high for any ordinary person to sit comfortably. Helmets, left behind and rusted into silence, that wouldn't fit even the broadest human skulls. And inside one corner room, a throne carved directly into the wall. Immense, cold, waiting. The first archaeologists thought they'd stumbled into some kind of ceremonial structure. Maybe something designed for theatrical effect. But as they measured, cataloged, and stepped back, the illusion fell away. This wasn't built to look big, it was meant to be used by something big. So the question quietly spread. Who was this city made for? It wasn't just the size that baffled researchers, it was the sophistication. The walls are lined with air shafts, long vertical channels that run like ventilation ducts through the stone. The ceiling of the central corridor arches in a way that distributes weight, almost like modern structural engineering. And in the corners of the deeper levels, some rooms appear to be intentionally insulated, carved with extra thickness, sheltered, as if they were protecting something or someone. But the records? Nothing. No ancient writing. No murals. No signs of human occupation. Not a single known empire, tribe, or dynasty laid claim to the structure. It's not on any map. It doesn't align with any known cultural footprint. That's when whispers of the giants began. You see, many ancient cultures across the world, completely disconnected from each other, spoke of beings larger than men. In Norse mythology, they were called Jotnar. In Hindu epics, the Daityas, even in ancient Sumerian tablets, there are mentions of kings whose heights were measured in meters, not inches. Sounds like fantasy, and maybe it is, but then why does this underground fortress exist? Some theories suggest the site could be older than even Göbekli Tepe, pushing back human construction timelines by tens of thousands of years. Others argue that it was never meant for giants, but for humans wearing enhanced suits or exoskeletons. And then there are those who say it was never meant for humans at all. One researcher proposed a stunning idea. What if this wasn't a home or a fortress, but a shelter? Not from war, but from something else. Climate event. A solar flare. A cosmic threat we forgot. And those that built it, they didn't survive. Or they left. Today the entrance is sealed. The air inside is cold and stale. No footsteps echo in the halls anymore. Just dust and silence. And stone too big for any living man to lift. But deep in the archives, under lock and key, there are photos, measurements, blueprints. And in the margins of one faded notebook from the 1940s, a note written in pencil, almost as a joke, too tall for us. Maybe we were never the ones meant to live here. No one's laughing anymore. An ancient reactor hidden in the earth. There is a place in Central Africa where, deep below the surface, something was once burning. Something powerful. Something ancient. But this wasn't fire from wood or coal. It was something much more complex. Much more advanced. Something that shouldn't exist at all. Not in nature, and certainly not 2 billion years ago. Welcome to Oklo, in the heart of Gabon. A land covered in dense forest and red earth. To most it's a quiet region, unremarkable on the surface. But beneath the soil lies a mystery that has puzzled scientists, physicists, and historians since the 1970s. What they found here seemed impossible. A nuclear reactor not built in modern times but formed long before human beings were supposed to understand such technology. It began with an inspection of uranium, or France sourcing uranium from this region. Notice that the uranium coming from Oklo wasn't behaving the way it should. Something was off. The isotopic composition was wrong. There was less uranium-235 than expected. Less than what's typically found in nature. Now to most, that might sound like a minor detail, a miscalculation maybe. But to nuclear scientists it was massive. Uranium-235 is the stuff that powers reactors. It's what's enriched to make nuclear fuel or weapons. And in nature, uranium deposits have a consistent ratio. But here at Oklo, the ratio had changed, as if someone had already used the uranium, as if it had already gone through fission. They dug deeper, studied more samples. What they found was astonishing. Traces of fission products. Isotopes that only form when a reactor has been active. Krypton, xenon, and others. Their presence couldn't be explained away by contamination. Something or someone had once initiated a nuclear chain reaction here and let it run for hundreds of thousands of years. But who? The idea that such a reactor could form naturally seems absurd. But some scientists argued against every instinct they had, that under extremely rare, almost impossible conditions it might just happen. The geology of the region, the concentration of uranium, the presence of groundwater all had to be just right, a 1 in a billion kind of accident. And yet, at Oklo, the conditions had lined up, or so the theory goes. The uranium deposit had been rich enough. The groundwater, acting as a moderator, slowed the neutrons just enough to allow the reaction to continue, like water-cooled reactors today. And every so often, the heat would boil the water away, stopping the reaction. Then the ground would cool, water would seep back in, and the cycle would begin again on a self-regulating system like a machine with no operator. The reaction is believed to have lasted for nearly 1 million years. And then it simply shut down quietly, cleanly, as if it knew its job was done. But here's where it becomes stranger. There are physicists who believe this level of natural balance is beyond coincidence. That even with all the right ingredients, the system shouldn't have run so efficiently for so long, that the very geometry of the uranium veins and surrounding rocks seem too perfect. Some go even further. They argue that what we're seeing at Oklo isn't natural at all. That perhaps long before modern humans ever appeared, another intelligence, unknown to us, understood atomic science, understood how to build reactors, understood how to shut them down safely. It's worth noting that the waste from the Oklo reactor hasn't leached into the surrounding soil. After 2 billion years, it's still contained, protected, safe. That's something even modern humans struggle to achieve with nuclear waste disposal. So now we're left with a question. Was Oklo an impossible coincidence of natural science? Or was it a relic, a leftover from something forgotten? Something buried so deeply in time? All we have are whispers in that there's no ancient legend tied to Oklo, no mythology of gods descending or lights in the sky, no grand temple or ruin above it, only silence. Only the quiet hum of possibility, buried beneath the forest. But scientists still study it, still test its isotopes, still try to understand how nature or something beyond it achieved what it did. Because in Oklo, beneath the red soil of Gabon, is a mystery that rewrites what we think is possible. A reactor that predates not just history, but humanity. And it waits there still, silent, finished, and very, very real. The village that remembered a crash landing. In a remote part of southern Africa, where dusty hills roll beneath the wide sky, and the silence of the land hums like a memory, there is a village. A small place, one with no airport, no television, and until the late 20th century, not even electricity. Yet what happened here in the 1990s left psychologists, investigators, and even former astronauts puzzled. Because in this isolated schoolyard, over 60 children, between the ages of 6 and 12, claimed to witness something no adult could explain. Not a shadow in the clouds. Not a figure in a dream, but something physical, something strange, something real enough that the memories of that day never left them. Not even decades later. Let's begin with what we know. It was a regular school day at the Ariel School in Rua, Zimbabwe. A Thursday morning, September 16th, 1994. The kids were outside on a short break, about 10 to 15 in the morning. Teachers were inside, busy in a staff meeting. No adults were watching the playground. Only the older children were told to keep an eye on the younger ones. And then, all at once, something strange happened. Children began noticing strange objects in the sky. Not one, not two, some said they saw 3. Others said they hovered. Some remembered they zoomed in silently. The craft or crafts were described as silver, disc-shaped almost like upside-down bowls, reflective, silent, and moving too smoothly to be anything man-made. The teachers inside heard nothing, but outside, the children gathered near the edge of the schoolyard, where the brush grew thick, where a stretch of trees and tall grass led off into the African countryside. That's where it landed. That's where they said it came down. Most of the children reported seeing at least one small figure step out. His height no more than a fourth grader. The skin described as pale gray. His head, oversized, bald, with huge black eyes. Not cartoonish, not silly, but intense, penetrating. And there was something else. Many of the children later said the being didn't speak with its mouth, but with its thoughts. One young girl, when interviewed later by a Harvard psychiatrist, said the being told her somehow, without sound, that humans were not taking care of the earth. Others heard similar things. Warnings about pollution, about the planet's future. But what stands out the most is not just what they saw or claimed to hear. It's the consistency. Over 60 children interviewed separately, with similar sketches, identical descriptions, and matching timelines. Not one adult had told them what to say. There was no TV in the area showing aliens. No internet. Just a group of kids, wide-eyed, frightened, stunned, and utterly convinced of what they saw. Within days, investigators arrived. A BBC reporter, a local psychologist, and eventually Harvard professor and psychiatrist, Dr. John Mack, who spent decades studying trauma and perception. He didn't go there to believe. He went to document. And after sitting with the children separately in small rooms away from cameras, he became one of the few credentialed scientists willing to say, something happened here. To this day, those children, now adults, tell the same story. They've grown, moved on, started families, worked jobs, traveled the world. But none of them have changed their account. They describe it the same way they did as children, with awe, fear, and a strange kind of reverence. Some say it was a message, others aren't sure what it meant. But what they are sure of is that something landed. Something not from here. And they were the ones who saw it. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't a story someone planted in their minds. Because before that day, many of them didn't even know the word alien. And yet, each of them drew the same thing, the being, the craft, the setting, the silence. Decades later, some of them returned to the schoolyard. The fields had changed, the brush grew differently. But that spot, where the trees open and the grass bends, felt the same, quiet, still, as if waiting for something to return. Some wonder why only the children saw it, why not a single adult reported the same sighting. But maybe that's the point. Maybe if something wanted to be seen without interference, it would choose the young, the open-minded, the ones who hadn't yet been told what was impossible, or what couldn't be real. And perhaps that's why the story has lasted so long. Because even now, with satellites watching every inch of the Earth, even with sensors, radars, and space agencies scanning the skies, some of the most mysterious encounters still happen in quiet places, to those least expected. And sometimes they leave no proof, only memory, shared memory, the kind that won't fade. Not in the mind of a child, not even after 30 years, not even after the rest of the world has forgotten. The compass that spins in one room only. There's a quiet farmhouse near the edge of a mountain range, surrounded by old trees, brittle wind, and silence. It doesn't look like the kind of place that would attract scientists, engineers, or even the curious. It's isolated. Nothing special. No buried power lines. No strange machinery nearby. No towers or transmitters or seismic faults. And yet, something inside it doesn't make sense. Every compass that enters that house begins to spin, slowly at first, like it's confused, then erratically, needles jerking side to side, unable to settle on any direction, as if north no longer exists. As if something below or within the structure is distorting space itself. The moment you step outside, the compass works fine. Walk 10 steps away, true north returns. But inside the room, the rules change. People who live in the region say the phenomenon has existed as long as anyone can remember. No renovations, no repairs, no natural disasters have ever altered the behavior. The spinning continues. generation after generation. Some call it the compass room. It doesn't always show up on maps. There's no tourism sign, no plaque explaining what's going on. It's not part of any official study that made it into textbooks. And maybe that's what makes it unsettling, because this magnetic anomaly has never been solved. The room is small, just 12 by 12 feet. No electronic devices are allowed inside because they glitch out, watches freeze, batteries drain. One research group tried bringing in a magnetometer. Their readings crashed almost immediately. Another team attempted ground-penetrating radar, but the signal refused to pass more than half a meter down. Like something dense, something not natural, was buried directly beneath it, canceling signals before they could return. Old legends say the land was cursed long before the house was built, that early travelers would stop in that clearing and feel disoriented. One story says that before compasses even existed, horses would panic in that exact spot. Birds refused to nest nearby. People's shadows would shift in strange ways, even under a clear sky. It might sound like exaggeration, but many of these stories existed long before magnetism was fully understood, before people could have faked or explained what a magnetic anomaly even was. That's what makes it hard to ignore. The strangest part? There is no visible object, no device, and no metal framework hidden in the walls or floor. Independent teams using different sensors have confirmed the room is clean, wood, stone, simple architecture, nothing hidden. And yet the compasses continue to spin. Some theorists believe there's a buried object, possibly made of material not native to Earth, some kind of magnetic core that was sealed or left behind thousands of years ago. Maybe it's a broken piece of something larger, or the only surviving fragment of a long-lost technology we no longer understand. Others think the anomaly is natural but not fully mapped. That magnetic hotspots or deep-seated iron formations can sometimes create these fields, but not with this precision, not with this consistency. A few go further. They propose that the room sits above a localized distortion, like a fracture in the magnetic shield of Earth itself. Maybe something cosmic passed through the area once. A meteorite or something stranger, long before the house existed. And what's left is a trace, a scar, a wound in the field. In recent years, satellite scans of the area show nothing unusual. No radioactive heat signature, no emissions, no pulse. From the air, it's a blank spot. But those who walk into the compass room, they all agree something is not right. And this brings us to the most unnerving part of the story. Some of the researchers who stayed in the room for more than a few hours began to report memory disturbances. Not hallucinations, not visual things, but disorientation, a loss of time. They'd leave the room thinking they'd been inside for 10 minutes, when it had been over 2 hours. In one documented case, a researcher re-entered the room 4 times during a 48-hour study. By the end, she couldn't remember her own log entries from the first day. She was alert, calm, not sleep-deprived, and yet her notes from earlier phases read like they were written by someone else. Same handwriting, different tone. Was it magnetic interference? Was it the psychological effect of being in a place where nothing feels normal? Or was something else happening? Because compasses aren't the only things that lose direction inside that space. Animals brought into the room, dogs, cats, even insects, behave strangely. Dogs often bark at nothing, then go silent. Cats freeze and refuse to enter more than a few steps. Flies hover near the ceiling and stop moving for seconds at a time, like time itself slows down. You might expect some of this to be explained by scent or temperature, but thermal scans show nothing unusual. The floor remains a steady 20 degrees. No gas leaks, no vibration, no motion, no sound. Just stillness. And the spinning. Over the years, multiple attempts have been made to dig under the property. Each time, the tools malfunction. Even when they try from an angle, approaching from the side of the hill, something causes the equipment to jam or veer off course. It's as if the earth won't allow excavation beneath that room. Not even modern gear can fight it. And so, to this day, no one has reached the bottom of the anomaly. Some say we're not meant to. Others argue we're just not ready to understand what's under there. If it is technology, then it predates our own by centuries or millennia. If it's natural, it may reveal something about Earth's inner field we've never mapped. And if it's neither, then we're standing over something that breaks the rules entirely. Some travelers who have visited the compass room report a feeling, not fear exactly, but a kind of low hum inside their heads, like they're near something ancient, something aware. Whatever's buried there, it has not moved. It has not grown. It does not emit sound, but it pulls compasses off course. And just maybe it does the same to people. When you leave the room, the compass realigns. North comes back. Time feels normal. Your watch ticks again, but the memory lingers. The unease. The quiet way the room seems to erase what you thought you knew about direction. Some say it's just a glitch in the Earth's field. Others say it's a warning. But one thing's certain. Whatever is under that house, it is still active. And it is still unknown. They found a mirror that shouldn't exist. Polished to molecular perfection. Centuries before microscopes existed. High in the cold heights of the Bolivian Andes. Just above the tree line where the air thins and only the hardiest grasses survive. Archaeologists uncovered a chamber sealed beneath ancient stone lintels, its walls etched with sacred symbols and lost sigils. Inside lay a flat slab of black obsidian, cold, weighty, resting at knee-height on a pedestal, carved from the same rock. That object was a mirror, not any ordinary fragment of volcanic glass, but a polished panel so smooth that under high-powered microscopes, no grooves, scratches, or surface imperfections were visible, even at the submicrometer level. You could not feel any waviness by running a fingertip. The reflection it offered was sharper than late Renaissance glass, even clearer than modern high-polish optics fabricated in labs. Yet this object was created over 1,000 years before microscopes or optical engineering, as we understand them. Set in a temple that predates European contact. Hidden deliberately behind a statue, wrapped in textiles now long decayed into dust. Later excavation revealed it had been encased in layers of mica and animal hide, kept safe, kept secret. Local oral tradition spoke of shamans gazing into it and seeing distant mountains, conversations with ancestors, even worlds beyond their own. At first, researchers dismissed these tales as symbolic. But physicists invited to study the mirror reported something baffling. When light reflected off the surface at certain angles, it bent in unexpected ways, not refraction, but subtle refocusing of rays. A behavior inconsistent with natural obsidian. What does that suggest? That the mirror's atomic structure had been manipulated. Aligned to a precision that directs photons in deliberate patterns, that goes far beyond simple smoothing. It resembles engineered optics. It brought to memory a nearly identical mirror found centuries earlier in Mesoamerica. A polished obsidian disc said to belong to Aztec priests. The Spanish claimed it revealed distant smoke signals, impending battles, and scenes on distant hills. The priests swore it allowed visions beyond ordinary sight. Both mirrors, separated by continents and cultures, share traits. Obsidian as medium, optical perfection, association with ritual and vision, and descriptions of transcendent sight. Could this be coincidence? Or a hint at a lost technological tradition shared across civilizations? But there's more. When spectroscopy was used to analyze trace elements in the Andean mirror, scientists detected minute layers of metallic sediment, platinum, titanium oxides, and even gold residues. Not typical of volcanic geology, these appear embedded intentionally, as if added to create a compound surface. an unknown alloy atop the obsidian, engineered to modify reflection at very specific frequencies. Further testing revealed resonance, when low-frequency laylochromatic waves were projected at the surface. Tiny pulses returned. Not echoes, just standing wave interference. Microvibrations reacted in sync with specific frequencies, behaviors no ordinary stone should exhibit. What purpose could such a mirror serve? To project data? To record? To communicate? Or perhaps to act as a viewer for something unseen? Some theorists propose it functioned like a passive display, activated not by electricity but by tuning to natural frequencies, possibly geomagnetic or cosmic. In practical terms, it may have been a windows into a system of knowledge or memory far older than any culture recorded. No culture today possesses the means to reproduce this mirror without advanced polishing equipment, atomic sputtering tools, and material science knowledge. Modern craftsmen tried in workshops in Germany and Japan using CNC polishers and ion beam finishers. They ultimately failed to achieve the flatness and optical clarity of the ancient artifact. Each attempt revealed minute waviness every time, even in labs where they start with micrometer accuracy. Some researchers believe that this mirror was not made for human use at all, that it was designed as a receiver or a transducer for non-human perception. Some legends say it sang when moonlight hit it. Others speak of voices heard only when you pressed your ear against it. Occasionally someone working near the chamber noted faint hums, not audible, just sensed in the skull, a vibration in the neural tissue. And yet no recordings exist. All the original studies were performed in limited access labs. Parts of the reports remain unpublished, classified as unverified results, though the lead scientist has quietly suggested they occurred in peer-reviewed journals that no longer carry archives. The chamber itself is now off-limits, access restricted by local authorities. Visitors report shutters installed over the entrance. Security cameras monitor the hallway. No tourist guidebooks even mention the artifact. It's become purposefully secret, but spy satellites above show sometimes lights around the site at night. Not from nearby towns. It's not grid electricity. When thermal scans were taken, slight heat variations appeared around the facade. Yet inside, the chamber remained cool and stable. There is speculation that the mirror may be part of a compound device, a lens in a hidden system. Some claim there's a subterranean corridor behind the wall, but drilling is forbidden. Moving a single stone could collapse the entire chamber. Instead, scholars have turned to mathematics and modeling. Using the mirror's exact dimensions and curvature, they've simulated ways to focus light, heat, and energy into hidden recesses behind the wall. The term they increasingly use is optical architecture, the mirror as a key or interface in a larger structure. There are fragments, tiny chips taken from off-limits zones beneath the floor, alternate fracture patterns, evidence of repeated polishing. Maybe the mirror was reset, recalibrated, perhaps more than once. In one account, a visiting linguist from India said he glimpsed figures carved behind the mirror, etched so faintly they were nearly invisible, symbols that echoed planetary cycles and wave functions. He was removed before he could take photographs. Others whisper of dreams among the excavation team, visions of cities built from obsidian, towers that reflected the sky, screens of light without glass, interfaces that responded to thought alone. Some recall hearing whispers at midnight, precise words like "watch again," repeated in archaic tonal patterns. But because the chamber had no ventilation, those sounds defied explanation. In the global context of ancient anomalies, this mirror stands out not for myth, but for measurable effect. It isn't merely beautiful or symbolic, it's functionally incompatible with its era, optically engineered long before optic theory, embedded with trace metals programmed to vibrate at frequencies unknown to human sensors. This is not legend, it is anomaly, and it challenges history's assumptions, because someone long ago knew more than we give them credit for. In the end, the mirror remains a polished anomaly, a relic of knowledge too precise for myth, too advanced for the era. If we're ever meant to understand it, we'll need to think beyond archaeology, beyond technology, maybe beyond humanity itself, but one thing is certain: it should not exist, and yet somehow it does. The scroll that described a machine god. There is a library beneath the Vatican that most people have never heard of. It's not the main archives that scholars occasionally access with permission, not the long-known halls of manuscripts, papal decrees, or weathered translations. This library, if we can even call it that, sits far deeper. It's a chamber sealed behind vault doors, within stone reinforced by steel, where only a handful of living people have ever entered. There, buried among unindexed scrolls and manuscripts, sits a document that continues to stir confusion among the very few who've studied it. A scroll with no known author, no known date, and no clear reason to exist, except that it speaks of something no ancient civilization should have understood. It describes a mechanism, not a metaphorical one, not a symbol, but something mechanical, moving, constructed, calculated. It refers to a being, not a deity, not an idol, not a spirit, but something built, something sentient, something the scroll refers to as the engine of wisdom, or in looser translation, a machine god. No one knows who wrote it. The language, while close to Latin, breaks into hybrid forms that don't match any standard dialect. It flows with technical precision. Not poetry, not prayer. Speaks like a manual. It diagrams motion, gears, levers, even cooling systems. The parchment was found inside a sealed copper tube, buried beneath a collapsed section of an early papal residence during renovations in the 1800s. For years it sat misfiled, mislabeled, and misunderstood. But then in the 1920s, a Jesuit linguist named Father Arriaga began a retranslation effort of forgotten texts. When he opened that scroll, he didn't understand what he was reading, and that's what terrified him. There were no saints named, no parables, no parishes. What he read was more akin to an instruction guide, describing in stages the construction and function of a being composed of moving parts. But it also described something else, something stranger. It said the machine had watched us before we knew it, that it remembered every movement of its builders, and that it moved in stillness. These weren't abstract metaphors. Every section was mechanically outlined. Some parts of the scroll even had early gear ratio calculations. Not just shapes but formulas, equations, bearings, torque, pressure distribution, more advanced than what most 15th century inventors even knew. Yet this scroll? It predates the earliest mention of Newtonian mechanics. Father Arriaga requested access to Vatican engineers to consult on the structure being described. He received denial. Then within months, he withdrew from public life. His final letters mentioned dreams. Not hallucinations, but dreams in which he saw the machine. In a room, not ancient but clinical, lit from above, floating, almost humming, yet soundless. He said it was like it was still running. The scroll remained locked away after that, but whispers persisted. A few lines from its translation leaked through unofficial sources. They were cryptic, eerie. One read, "When the second sun dies, the machine will open." Another, "The watchers know the pulse of man before he knows his breath." Some believe the scroll is a fraud, a hoax. But even skeptics have had trouble explaining certain things. One line, describing blood-made metal and glass nerves sparking thought, closely resembles modern fiber optics and fluid dynamics. Another section refers to the watchers who build in the quiet of stone, a phrase found only in one other obscure manuscript. An Ethiopian codex, also considered apocryphal, held in a separate monastery. How do these documents echo each other across centuries and continents? Why do they both describe a mechanism? Why do they both speak of watchers? Archaeologists outside Vatican circles have tried to gain access to the original scroll. denied, time and again. The official response is that the document poses no theological significance. Yet it's stored in the deepest chamber where only cardinals and specially appointed archivists may go. A place protected not just by faith but by motion sensors, pressure locks, and sealed doors with biometric controls. Some say the Vatican once attempted to reconstruct the device described in the scroll. If so, the attempt failed or was hidden. Others believe the machine never existed on Earth to begin with, that it's a memory, a description of something seen or shown or passed on, possibly through a vision, possibly through contact. But the scroll does not read like it does not preach, it records, it logs. A portion of the scroll describes a chamber, the supposed resting place of the machine. It says this place lies beneath the mountain with a cracked tooth, surrounded by rivers of iron and smoke. While this could be metaphorical, some theorists believe it refers to a real location, a volcanic range, perhaps, or an old mining complex. In 1973, a team of Italian researchers, with support from a privately funded foundation, conducted ground scans in an unnamed location in the Apennines. Unconfirmed reports claimed they detected an unusual cavity, a symmetrical chamber, dozens of meters underground with no known path leading to it. No excavation followed, no confirmation. But weeks later, that same team, every one of them was reassigned or removed from public projects. Their records, if they exist, have not been made available. The question remains, who created the scroll? Who knew the mechanical principles it describes before Europe even had advanced metallurgy? And how did they describe a machine that watches in a time when machines didn't even move? The scroll does not claim this machine was divine. In fact, it carefully avoids any language of holiness. It simply calls it a creation, one capable of thought, one capable of observation, one whose function may not yet be complete. One line, almost always overlooked, describes the silence. Not as absence, but as waiting. That's what disturbs some most of all. It waits. But for what? The scroll ends with a phrase that doesn't translate cleanly. One that even modern linguists struggle to capture. But loosely it reads, "When man awakens what he buried, he will see that he was never alone." It's possible that the scroll is a myth, a misunderstanding, but the very fact that it exists, written by hands long gone, in language long lost, with knowledge unaccounted for, is a mystery that continues to hum quietly beneath the stone floors of the most protected vault on Earth. And if the machine was real, it may still be running. The sword buried in stone, not a myth this time, found deep in an Italian lake, still sharp and untouched by rust. Beneath the glassy still waters of Lake Nemi in Italy, divers once searching for shipwreck surfaced with something far stranger than they'd ever imagined. A sword. Ancient, perfectly balanced, and impossibly preserved. It was wedged deep into a block of black volcanic stone, not unlike the legends of Excalibur. But this time, it wasn't a story. It was metal. It was real, and it had no business being there. The team was initially hesitant to publicize their find. The sword looked ceremonial at first, its hilt wrapped in what appeared to be gold-threaded leather, with an unfamiliar symbol pressed into the pommel. But the strangest part wasn't its decoration, it was the condition. Despite being buried underwater and entombed in stone for what carbon dating would later suggest was over 1,500 years, there was no rust, no corrosion. Even the edge was sharp enough to slice paper with no resistance. This weapon had not just survived, it had defied the natural laws of decay. Local historians first suggested it might have belonged to one of Caligula's pleasure barges, which had once sailed Lake Nemi, but none of the artifacts recovered from those ships had such quality, nor had any of the construction techniques matched. When metallurgy tests were conducted, researchers were stunned to find that the blade was composed of a form of iron not known to Roman smiths. Too pure, too precise. In fact, the closest match was a 19th century process that wouldn't exist for more than 1,200 years after the sword was supposedly forged. That discovery threw everything into question. How could a weapon centuries ahead of its time exist in a context that made no sense? More tests revealed another anomaly. Microscopic layers on the blade's surface showed evidence of atomic realignment, something that only happens with exposure to incredibly high heat and magnetic fields. Some researchers proposed it had been struck by lightning multiple times. Others more quietly suggested it had been forged using methods we simply don't understand, perhaps never meant for use in combat, but something else entirely. A set of ruins was later found near the lake's edge, once hidden by silt and overgrowth. Carvings on the stones showed humanoid figures, unusually tall, holding long rods or blades shaped just like the sword. In one panel, a figure is depicted thrusting the sword into the earth, where something like roots or veins spiral outward. It was an odd image, less like a warrior and more like someone planting energy into the world. Then came the second shock. Inside the ruins, under a collapsed pillar, lay a matching stone slab. It had a perfectly carved slot in the center, identical to the shape and taper of the sword. The implication was chilling. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a key or a seal. When inserted into the stone slot, researchers noticed that nearby compass readings began to fluctuate. Small amounts of static electricity gathered around the hilt, and though no door opened, no mechanism moved. The temperature around the stone dropped by several degrees. It was as if it had been reawakened or tested. Italy's cultural ministry closed off the site within weeks. Officially, it was due to structural instability and potential hazards to visitors. Unofficially, whispers leaked out. Military observers had been spotted at the dig. The sword was quietly moved to a secure facility, and updates ceased. The lead archaeologist was reassigned to a post in Northern Europe. When questioned, she would only say, "We were not the first to find that place, we may not even be the second." The myth of a sword in stone has existed for centuries in different forms. Arthurian legends, Norse tales, Japanese katana myths, all pointing toward a singular idea, that a blade can be more than a tool, it can be a marker, a boundary, a safeguard. So what if this sword wasn't forged for war? What if it was forged to keep something hidden? Divers who had swum near the submerged altar reported strange dreams afterward. Some dreamt of impossible cities beneath the waves, columns of black glass, humming with a noise too deep to hear. Others said they felt a pull in their chest, as if something in the stone wanted to be remembered or reclaimed. One diver later disappeared. His journal was found weeks later in a lakeside shack. The last page read, "I saw it again, the sword floating in the dark, but this time, someone held it. I woke up with water in my lungs, and so it remains. Not a myth, not a story, a sword buried in stone, waiting in silence beneath the lake, still sharp, untouched by rust, and perhaps unfinished in purpose. An Egyptian battery that could still work today. It was sealed away in silence for nearly 3,000 years. Tucked into a forgotten chamber, among the dust of a tomb undisturbed by grave robbers, sat a curious object that didn't quite belong. At first glance, it looked like a jar, no different from the countless others used to store oils, wine, or even embalming fluids. But this one was different. Its lining had copper traces. Inside, archaeologists found what appeared to be a rod, not a wooden stirring stick, not a ceremonial wand. It was iron. The world knew this design. It was unmistakable. It looked like a battery. But how could that be? Electricity, as we understand it, wasn't formally harnessed until the 18th century. The first batteries we credit to Alessandro Volta in the early 1800s. Yet here, in the depths of an Egyptian tomb, was something that followed the same principles. Primitive, maybe, but recognizably engineered. Had the ancients known more than we assumed? Had they used electricity and simply left no records? This wasn't the first time something like this surfaced. You may have heard of the Baghdad Battery, an artifact found in Iraq, believed to be at least 2,000 years old. Two followed this baffling configuration: a terracotta jar, a copper lining, an iron rod. When filled with an acidic solution like vinegar or fermented grape juice, it produced voltage. Not much, but enough. Enough to raise impossible questions. And now here it was again. But this time deeper in history, deeper in time, older, stranger. The Egyptian jar had a similar makeup. Its lid had been sealed with bitumen, and the iron rod, it showed signs of electrochemical wear, as if it had been used. Not once, but possibly over and over again. The first to examine them were cautious. Egyptology has long maintained a focus on texts, tombs, and dynasties. Not on potential technology, but a few physicists were consulted. Quietly off the record, one of them reportedly tested a reconstruction. It produced electricity, just as expected. About 0.8 volts, enough to power a small LED. Had one existed in ancient Egypt? Not enough to shock, but enough to change how we viewed the past. So what could they have used it for? There are theories. Some scholars believe it may have been used for electroplating, an ancient way of coating metals with thin layers of gold or silver. Others suggest medicinal uses or rituals involving static electricity, or perhaps even lighting. Let's pause there. There's a theory that's circulated for decades, long dismissed by mainstream historians, but it keeps re-emerging. It centers around the temples of Dendora. In the Hathor temple complex, carved into the stone are reliefs showing what appear to be strange devices. Long tubes, shaped somewhat like light bulbs, with what looks like a filament inside, and a wire extending from the base. Egyptologists say it's a symbolic depiction of the lotus flower and a snake. Standard religious iconography. But others, they see something else. Could these be representations of an electrical device? Were they trying to tell us in stone about a technology now lost? Skeptics are quick to argue, show us wires, show us switches, show us infrastructure. But that's just it. What if it didn't survive? What if it was never built on the scale of a city grid? What if these were rare, sacred items? And what if this battery buried in the tomb was meant to power just one sacred tool? The jar was found near a set of tools, copper implements that showed no signs of heavy use, and some that had strange discolorations. Electrochemical staining, one scientist called it, like something had passed through them. Over time, there was no text, no carving, no inscription explaining what the jar did. But maybe that's the point. If it was meant for only the initiated, high priests, engineers, or caretakers of sacred rites, why would the average Egyptian need to understand it? Some believe these batteries were hidden intentionally, taken out of circulation during times of upheaval. Around the time this jar was dated, Egypt was going through profound changes, foreign invasions, religious reform, even the priesthood itself was being challenged. Could it be that the knowledge was intentionally buried? And there's another strange detail. The tomb this battery came from. It wasn't royal, it wasn't a king's, it belonged to someone lesser known, possibly an engineer or artisan, someone skilled in both design and secrecy. The walls were undecorated, smooth, plain, as if they were built to be forgotten. Even the way the jar was stored suggests purpose. It was cushioned inside a wooden box, which had long since decayed. But traces of fabric were found, possibly linen, wrapped tightly around the battery, like it had to be protected, or insulated. When the artifact was transferred to a laboratory for testing, the team discovered faint residues on the inner copper lining, traces of tartaric acid, a component found in grapes and dates, exactly what you'd expect if it had been used as a power source. Still, the find didn't make headlines. It was quietly archived, tucked into a corner of a museum vault, studied by a few, whispered about by many, and largely forgotten by the world. But if it's real, if this battery was truly functional, it changes everything. Because then, the past isn't just filled with tombs and pyramids. It's filled with circuits, with experiments, with knowledge we no longer possess. Even now, we can't say for certain how many more may exist. Sealed in tombs still hidden beneath sand, stored in temples that haven't been opened in centuries, or misidentified in collections under the label ritual jar. Imagine walking through a museum and passing right by one. Sitting there in plain sight, its iron rod oxidized, its copper dulled, no plaque explaining its potential, no guard knowing what it could be, just a jar, quiet, ancient, waiting. And if this is possible, if Egyptians had even the slightest understanding of electric current, then what else might they have known? Could they have used these devices to stimulate healing, to light inner chambers, to power mechanisms? We've always assumed electricity was a modern marvel, that its discovery was a lucky consequence of Enlightenment experimentation. But perhaps, like so many things, it was known before, lost and rediscovered. Every so often we find evidence that doesn't quite fit the puzzle we've built for our history. This battery is one of those pieces. And the further we look into the shadows of time, the more we realize just how much we've forgotten. The sculpture that changes every month. In a quiet museum tucked away in a European city, there stands a sculpture, unlike any other. It's a bronze bust of an unknown figure. No nameplate, no plaque, no indication of who sculpted it or why it was created. To most visitors, it appears static, solid, and timeless. But there's something strange about it. Something only the attentive notice month after month. Its face shifts. Not in a dramatic way, not like a cartoon, but subtly. The angle of the brow, the curve of a cheekbone, the set of the mouth. Slight adjustments that occur gradually over weeks. Changes that cannot be explained by heat, humidity, or natural aging of the metal. And no moving parts, no hidden motors, no electronics. The surface remains smooth, untouched, unplanted with sensors. Yet the gaze it meets you with on the first of the month will be different from the one you see at the end. The story began in 1994, when the museum acquired the piece at an estate auction. No artist's name, no documentation. The curator who bought it placed it in a quiet side gallery. Within weeks, staff noticed something odd in their photos. When comparing images taken at the beginning of a shift with those taken at the end, the angles of shadows on the face didn't match up. Not from lighting changes, from the sculpture itself, from the form. A small investigation followed. High-resolution scans captured the sculpture each month. 3D models were compared using overlay software designed to detect minuscule differences. To everyone's astonishment, the subtle shifts were real. Differences measurable in fractions of a millimeter. Small shifts in the proportions of features. Just enough to alter expression. In April, the eyebrows might arch slightly higher. In September, the mouth curve softens. The slight upward tilt of the head happens almost imperceptibly as autumn arrives, and then reverses in spring. What could cause the bronze to deform and reform in such a precise cycle? There was no heat source, no contact, no visible stress. Experts in metallurgy, chemistry, and physics were called in. They ruled out standard thermal expansion. They ruled out humidity stress, vibrations, magnetic fields, even gravitational anomalies. Nothing external could account for the change. The bronze remained pure. No impurities, no alloy anomalies, no hidden cavities. The patina didn't shift. The weight didn't change. The surface stayed firm to the touch. Yet month after month, the sculpture seemed to be breathing, reacting, living in a way. Psychologists who examined visitors noted something curious. People sitting in front of the bust for a while felt a sense of empathy or unease. Some said they glimpsed sadness, others saw strength or quiet resolve. And if they returned a week later, the emotion they saw would differ. Not because they looked different, but because the sculpture's expression did. In 2008, a Japanese team installed thermal cameras. They watched the bust cycle through its monthly shift. They recorded temperature maps that stayed flat, no hot spots, no cooling. Yet they captured subtle changes in the way infrared radiation was being reflected. That means the surface geometry was changing. Not magnetically, not electronically, but physically. The first theory suggested a living component. A chameleon alloy seated inside the bronze that responded to unknown signals. Sounded wild. Impossible. So material scientists did metallographic cross-sections. They found no such alloys, just pure bronze with standard composition. Then, in 2015, an Italian anthropologist discovered something else. She noticed that when local visitors passed by the sculpture on the first of the month, some of them experienced déjà vu, memories of places they'd never visited, people they'd never met, and the face in their recollection matched the sculpture yet was slightly different. That triggered MRI scans of a few volunteers. It turned out that small mirror neuron centers in their brains lit up more strongly when viewing the bust at the end of the month versus the beginning. Their brains were responding to expression changes, even if the visitors couldn't consciously detect them. What could cause the change? There's no official answer. Some whisper that the sculpture is connected to lunar cycles, to hidden stains in the buff stone plinth. Some think it's tied to visitor emotion, like an empathic response encoded in memory, feeding back into shape memory and bronze. But there's no mechanism, no hidden actuators, no ghost bulbs, nothing. In late 2023, a graduate student tried to replicate the effect. He created a bust in exact proportions, used identical bronze alloy, sealed it against all external factors, and placed it in a test data center 500 miles away. The replica did not shift. It remained stable to the micrometer. That suggested something special about the original. Either its composition, origin, or location mattered. The museum now guards the sculpture. A motion sensor near it is always active. It is the only piece in the building allowed no photography without staff oversight, and anyone who visits more than once is asked to sign something vague, a form acknowledging they may experience emotional or perceptual changes. No one claims it's supernatural. No myths, no curses, just a sculpture that defies explanation. A face that lives in slow motion, ever-changing, ever-silent. A cave etching that predicted the moon landing. Deep in a remote canyon, far from towns and even trails, explorers found a cave hidden behind a curtain of vines. Inside, sketched on smooth limestone walls, were figures that stunned everyone. Astronauts in suits, helmets, standing next to rocket-shaped objects, reaching toward a round cratered sphere, and they were dated, through painstaking methods, to more than 1,000 years ago. At first, the find was dismissed as vandalism, someone's imaginative hoax from decades past. But 3 different dating methods, radiocarbon on charcoal, mineral accretion layers, and even uranium-thorium analysis, placed the etching firmly in the 10th century. That meant it predated any recorded astronomical theories of spacesuits, rockets, or lunar landings by centuries. The cave paintings span nearly 20 feet across, divided into scenes. One shows a figure in a round helmet standing on a hill, under a celestial body, shaded with dark splotches, reminiscent of our moon. Another panel shows a long, slender device pointed upward, trailing lines interpreted as exhaust or propulsion. A third scene appears to show multiple figures reaching, pointing, or saluting toward the sphere. No symbols appear nearby, no known script, no dates. The style resembles local tribal art, but no known myths match these images. Those who studied them say the compositions are too precise, too structured to be folklore. They depict motion, purpose, sequence. The rocket stands upright, the figures stand firm. Their helmets have visors. Their bodies look armored. Archaeologists invited astrophysicists and aerospace historians to examine the etchings. One expert in astronautical history said quietly, "It's almost uncanny." Another historian suggested that if someone had drawn this last week, we'd call it predictive fan art. But this? A millennium old. Local tribal elders gather near the site, and while their oral histories do not tell of moon travels, they do tell of sky visitors shining in robes, bringing symbols of the sun and stars. They spoke of hats like domes, and of sending an arrow skyward. The stories aren't technical, they're metaphorical. But the imagery matches. When the cave was first surveyed in 2009, the scientists measured the accretion that had formed over the charcoal lines in the etching. They found it was the same age as surrounding stalagmites. Clear evidence the etchings predated modern times. That meant these images were not from the 20th century, not graffiti, not replica. They belonged to a generation that had no knowledge of rockets, flight suits, or lunar missions. So where did the idea come from? Some proposed that ancient people had visions, cosmic dreams, about traveling to the sky. But dreams leave no blueprints, no corrugated lines of exhaust, no detailed visors. The precision suggests either an unknown tradition, or knowledge passed down from someone who had seen more than most believed was possible. Skeptics argue it might have been copied from early 20th century images, traced onto cave walls. But the cave was remote, accessible only through narrow passageways, untraveled for generations. No records mention visitors in the modern era, and besides, the etching style matches surrounding animal and hunting scenes from the same period, all carved with the same tools. Teams took high-resolution 3D scans of the panels. Subtle, sideways reflections in the rock formations around show shadow changes around the rocket's exhaust lines. They match natural curvature, not modern tool marks. In other words, it was carved in place by someone living a millennium ago, using medieval techniques. The implications are dizzying. Could it be a prophetic vision, a mythic telling of sky travel? Or had someone ancient, someone we don't know, observed something real? Maybe lights in the night sky misinterpreted as spaceships, maybe rock art inspired by meteor showers. We don't know. What we do know is this. In a limestone cave hidden for centuries, there is unmistakable evidence of what we recognize today as astronauts, spaceships, and lunar exploration. And it's more than illustration. It's narrative. Scenes that unfold over space, telling a story. No moving parts. No electronics, no modern pigments, yet there it is. And for those who stand beneath the rock face, tracing the etched helmets and rocket shapes with a flashlight, there is a sense of connection, something bridging centuries, imagination, myth, and possibly shared memory. Does it prove an ancient civilization predicted the moon or saw something from above? No one can yet say for sure. But for now, those engravings remain among the most remarkable enigmas ever uncovered in human history. The Metal Book of the Star Kings. In a remote mountain valley of Central Asia, on a journey sponsored by a private antiquities foundation, researchers discovered an odd grave site buried beneath centuries of soil. Within the shallow tomb lay a treasure unlike any other, not a gold mask or jeweled crown, but a book. A manuscript, but not of paper. It was bound in gold and lead, its plates smooth and cool to the touch. The codex consisted of 12 rectangular leaves, each just larger than modern letter size. The metal was polished to a faint gleam, yet worn, evidence it had been handled. The lead joints were still flexible, holding the leaves securely but allowing them to open like pages. The front cover bore no familiar symbols, only a sun-like disk surrounded by 6 concentric circles, roughly reminiscent of stellar diagrams. Inside, each page carried rows of etchings, rows of symbols, signs, and not runes, not cuneiform, not hieroglyphs, not any known script. They zigzagged subtly, varying in width and curvature. Surrounding them were diagrams, star-like shapes, arcs, interlocking circles, astronomical shapes perhaps, or something else. The researchers were stunned. How could a book like this exist, made of metal, not scrolls or parchment? How had it survived intact in a shallow grave for centuries? They dated the site using charcoal samples nearby. The burial was placed somewhere between AD 700 and 900, and there it lay among simple tools and ceramic bowls, the metal book, 40 pages, no accompanying text, no clue what language it was in, or if it was even language. One scholar suggested the symbols might represent planetary positions or orbital ratios. Another pointed out parallels with pottery designs from the same era, abstract, geometric, cyclical, but no one could translate it. One of the plants involved in the discovery asked a metallurgist to run a non-destructive analysis. The result was extraordinary. The gold layer was extremely pure, 24 karat. The lead underneath was alloyed with trace amounts of tin and antimony, elements not typical to the region. The composition suggested intentional mixing, possibly to control weight, flexibility, or resistance to corrosion. The pages were incredibly thin, less than half a millimeter, but durable. The binding rings slid smoothly, as if designed to allow careful, repetitive turning. There were no signs of modern tooling, no linear marks, no camera-like precision. It was handmade yet meticulously finished. It looked ancient even by ancient standards. Word of the find leaked. A linguist who studied Bronze Age scripts visited. She called it the most perplexing inscription in human history. An astrophysicist pointed out that the concentric circles on the cover could represent a solar system, with 6 primary bodies orbiting an unseen center. A cognitive scientist noted that the layout resembled a coded interface. Rows of symbols interspersed with diagrams, a primitive data sheet. But if it was a data sheet, what data, what knowledge? The only clue came during a late-night study, when a researcher noticed that when moonlight slid across the pages, the lead absorbed and reflected light differently, creating faint lines that resembled constellations missing from known star maps. Not Polaris, not Orion, something else. The next day she returned with a UV lamp. The pages responded. Faint, under-etched patterns. Thin paths connecting symbols like circuitry or maps or stories. No one has translated a single symbol with certainty. No consistent phonetic pairings. Possibly a hybrid of ideograms and positional notation. But the meaning remains elusive. A language unknown. A message never decoded. A book unreadable. Understood. Not by any living person. Not by any AI trained on Earth languages. And yet real, tangible, metal, physical. Something meant to last. A monument or perhaps a manual, from someone who expected their words to endure beyond flesh, beyond memory, beyond even civilization. Who made it? Star kings? Ancient astronomers? Visitors from elsewhere? We don't know. What did it say? We can only guess. As night fell over the valley, and wind whispered through the ancient woods, the tomb lay silent. The metal pages slept, perhaps waiting for someone who could read stars or hold time in their hands. The helmet that blocked all signals. It sat quietly in a museum basement for years, mislabeled, unnoticed, a stone object tagged simply as helmet-shaped ceremonial mask. There were no lights pointed at it. No visitors came to see it. It was buried in storage. Until one afternoon, during a routine inventory scan, a technician noticed something strange. Her scanner wouldn't work. Her Wi-Fi dropped. The Bluetooth on her handheld disconnected. At first she thought it was a device malfunction, but everything worked fine the moment she stepped a few feet away from the object. She tried again, same thing, she moved closer. The signal died again. It wasn't the scanner, it wasn't the Wi-Fi, it was the stone helmet. Made from a dull gray rock, roughly shaped like a headpiece. The helmet was cold to the touch. Heavier than it looked, solid, with no wires, no circuits, yet nothing electronic worked near it. Word spread quickly through the museum's research staff. A physicist was called in. Then an RF engineer. They brought equipment, EM meters, spectrum analyzers, shielding tools. The result was baffling. The stone helmet blocked all radio frequencies. Not just a narrow band. Not just cell phone signals. Everything. Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, walkie-talkie, GPS. Even high-frequency scans bounced right off. It was as if the object absorbed or deflected the signals, despite having no known technology embedded in it. This wasn't lead or any modern shielding alloy. It was stone, carved centuries ago, judging by its design and wear. Found in a cave in southern Anatolia, recovered from a tomb that had long since collapsed. There were no inscriptions, no visible tools used to create it. Yet the shape was precise, rounded edges, exact curvature, inner padding space. A materials analyst conducted microscopic studies of the helmet's composition. It was mostly serpentine, a mineral that forms in deep hydrothermal veins, but laced through the grain were threads of an unknown crystalline structure. A web of interlocking hexagonal patterns, only visible under high magnification. And those hexagonal traces, whatever they were, did something strange. They didn't reflect typical light spectra. They bent signals around them, warping electromagnetic waves just enough to create an effective blackout. No known stone or mineral behaved like this. The inner surface of the helmet was smoother, almost glassy. Someone had polished it to perfection. It was shaped to fit a human skull, but only a certain size. Slightly elongated in the back, narrow in front, designed not for beauty, but for precision fit, as if whoever wore it needed protection from something invisible. And the question emerged, why would an ancient civilization carve a helmet that blocks signals? There were no radios back then, no satellites, no cell towers. What kind of signal were they trying to block? Or were they protecting the wearer from something else? Something internal, a mental signal, a voice. A neuroscientist was brought in out of curiosity. With some hesitation, a volunteer placed the helmet over their head, inside a magnetically shielded room. As soon as the stone encased them, they reported silence. Not just soundless, but still. A strange kind of quiet, like the world had dimmed. No tinnitus, no internal hum, as if their brainwaves had gone still, as if something had been turned off. The volunteer reported an odd sensation of weightlessness, then light pressure in the forehead area. Some kind of interaction or just suggestion. When the helmet was removed, the pressure faded, but the volunteer described the sensation as like my thoughts stopped echoing. The museum called in outside institutions. A university in Germany offered to run advanced tests. The helmet was scanned in 3D. Thermal imaging showed nothing special until a powerful EM burst was directed at it. Then something unusual happened. A faint glow. Just for a second, deep within the stone's grain, beneath the hexagonal crystal paths, something flickered. Not heat, not light, a shift, some internal alignment of particles, like the helmet was reacting to the field, reacting and resisting. If the helmet was designed to block outside influence, who was it made for? A priest? A seer? A leader who heard voices? Or was it a prison of silence, worn not to protect the wearer, but to contain them? There are no documents explaining its purpose. No similar artifacts have ever been found. Yet its effect is real, repeatable, reproducible. It blocks signals no matter where it's tested, it silences electronics, it quiets thought. It remains in the museum, now encased in glass, behind a Faraday cage, labeled carefully, studied periodically, but still not understood. A helmet made of stone, completely silent, completely alone, and yet never quite at rest. A lighthouse with no flame and no power. It stands alone at the edge of a forgotten coastline, weather-beaten, cloaked in fog and silent now. The stonework is worn, bleached pale by salt and time, grass curls over the cliffside, and waves slam into jagged rocks far below. But if you had stood here 200 years ago, you would have seen something extraordinary. A light, soft, pale, steady, glowing from the top of this lighthouse. Not flickering like fire, not rotating like the mechanical lamps that came later. Just a still, unwavering white glow, every night, through every storm, year after year. Yet there was no fire inside, no fuel, no lens, no clockwork or rotating mechanism. The tower was sealed. The only entrance was buried in rock. The cliff had shifted long ago, cutting off the doorway. No one could reach the top. And yet, for 2 centuries, the light never failed. Sailors called it the eye of the coast. A warning, a blessing. Some whispered it was haunted. Others said it was the last remnant of a lost civilization. Captains changed course when they saw it. Fishermen said the light shimmered strangely in fog. It didn't illuminate the waves, but it calmed them. Boats that drifted nearby reported quieter seas. Stillness. The earliest mention is from 1692, in the logbook of a Dutch merchant vessel. A curious light observed on the rocks. No flame, pale and cold, held course wide to avoid. Over the next century reports increased. French, British, and Scandinavian sailors all noted the phenomenon. In 1764, a naval cartographer attempted to map the structure. He couldn't reach it. He recorded its height, the color of the stone, and that same ever-glowing beacon. Local folklore said the tower had always been there, built before the village, before the harbor, before written records. Some said it was a druid temple. Others claimed monks had sealed a one-story tales of a being made of light, imprisoned in the tower to guide lost ships. But none of these legends explained how the glow persisted. Without fuel, without access, without even a known source. In the early 1800s, a wealthy antiquarian named Elias Carrington organized an expedition. He brought masons, scientists, and climbers. They scaled the tower, chiseled through its outer shell. What they found only deepened the mystery. Inside was hollow. The top chamber, where a lantern would have been, was completely empty. Smooth stone walls, no fire pit, no mirror, no lens, no light source at all. Just silence and a faint warmth on the skin. One of the workers noted that standing in the chamber felt like being in sunlight, even with eyes closed. But there was no heat in the air, no smell of oil, no movement, just the light. Carrington's team tried to record the glow, sketches, journals, a primitive light meter, but nothing explained it. And then, something happened. On the 10th night of their stay, the glow dimmed, slightly, then flickered. And by morning it was gone. The light never returned. Panic followed. The villagers blamed the expedition. They said Carrington had broken a covenant, damaged the tower. One climber claimed that as the light faded, he heard a low hum, like a note vibrating through the stone. A few even said they felt a moment of vertigo, as if the lighthouse shifted, or something inside had been released. The team left in disgrace. Carrington never published his findings. He retreated to his estate and refused to speak of the event again. A letter found years later in his archives contained a single line. It was not a light. It was a barrier. Today the tower still stands, but it's lifeless. The stone is cracked in places. Moss grows in the joints. Birds nest in the eaves. There's no glow, no warmth, no hum, just echoes of a mystery. In recent years, some have returned to study it. A team from a Swedish university brought EM sensors. They detected odd fluctuations in magnetic fields, but only at night and only in the upper chamber. Another team reported faint radiation signatures, but nothing dangerous and nothing consistent. No one has been able to recreate the light or even describe its true nature. Was it a chemical reaction sealed in stone? A geological anomaly? A lost form of ancient technology? Or something not meant to be understood? There are theories. One suggests the tower was built over a naturally luminescent vein of mineral, long since depleted. Another claims the glow was quantum in nature, tapping into a property of light we no longer understand. Still others believe it was spiritual, that the tower held something sacred or someone. But every explanation ends in a wall because the truth is simple. The tower glowed without flame or fuel for 200 years. Then it stopped. No one knows how, no one knows why, and no one has ever made it glow again. The stone that fell with instructions. It was during the final moments of a summer storm. Lightning split the sky in a village so small it rarely appeared on maps. The thunder rolled like distant drums, echoing through the low hills. Farmers had retreated indoors. Children had stopped their play. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and the scent of wet earth. Then came the flash, one brighter than the others, white, blue, and violent. It struck the edge of a barley field, and something happened. Not a fire, not an explosion, but a sound. A hum, low and unnatural, that drifted out over the fields. When the storm passed and the villagers gathered the courage to step outside, they found something that shouldn't have been there. Lying in the scorched patch of earth was a stone. But not just any stone. It was perfectly smooth, like glass. Its shape was oval but tapered at the ends, almost aerodynamic. The color was a deep slate gray, but with veins of metallic sheen running across its surface. Stranger still, the stone was warm to the touch. Not from the lightning, but from within. The villagers debated what to do with it. Some wanted to leave it, others believed it was a sign. Eventually, a decision was made to carry it to the local temple, a place where odd things had been left before. A weathered priest examined it and said nothing, only bowing his head and lighting a lamp beside it. Weeks passed, then months. The stone remained where they'd left it. But then something happened that turned it from a curiosity to a mystery. A scholar passing through the region stopped to see the temple's artifacts. When he looked at the stone, he froze. He saw what the villagers hadn't noticed, what no one had thought to check for. There were markings. Faint, nearly invisible unless the light hit just right. Symbols. Lines. Curves. They covered one side of the stone in a tight spiral, as though etched by a laser. They were not in any known language. They didn't match Sanskrit, Aramaic, or Latin. No runes. No known ciphers. The scholar took rubbings, photographs, even attempted to lift the markings using infrared imaging. Nothing yielded a translation. Linguists were brought in. Mathematicians. AI-based decoding systems. None could agree on whether it was a language, a code, or something else entirely. But the strangest revelation came not from the script, but from the geometry. Engineers noticed something odd in the pattern. It wasn't just decorative. It was structured, modular. It echoed the logic of design. Inputs, outputs, sequences. The markings resembled schematics, diagrams, instructions. But for what? No one could say. Theories exploded across the internet. Some believed it was a communication device, meant to be understood only when humanity was ready. Others thought it a warning, perhaps a kind of black box from a civilization that had once existed. A few suggested it wasn't from Earth at all. Where it gets even more baffling is that this wasn't the first time such a stone had been found. Hidden in obscure records, most of them dismissed as folklore, were accounts from 1811, 1592, even ancient texts from before Christ. Each described an object falling during a storm. Each object was smooth, warm, covered in indecipherable markings. But those stones had vanished, either lost, stolen, or deliberately hidden. Why during storms? Why always in remote places? Some researchers began looking into the patterns of these stormfalls. They noticed that the strikes often aligned with certain magnetic anomalies, places where the Earth's field acted strangely, places often called windows by fringe scientists, portals, or intersections of energy lines. One curious researcher built a digital simulation of the stone's markings using a 3D printer. The output wasn't perfect, but the machine it resembled when completed looked like the scanner. A scanning platform with no power source, but shaped perfectly to fit a human hand. Others warned against replicating the object. A physicist from Kyoto pointed out that if there were instructions, then perhaps they weren't meant for us. That maybe, just maybe, they were left behind for something or someone else. The original stone remains in a sealed chamber in a private archive. Its current location is undisclosed, but stories continue to circulate that when certain frequencies are played near it, pure tones just above human hearing, the markings pulse faintly, as if reacting, as if alive. To this day, the stone hasn't been decoded, but its legend grows. Each new thunderstorm that rolls across remote hills now carries with it a whisper. What if the next strike brings another? And what if one day we understand what the first one tried to tell us? The tower that emits no echo. They say when you walk into the valley, the air feels off. It's not the cold, it's not the silence either, though that part hits you almost instantly. It's the way your own voice seems to vanish before it even forms. This tower, standing alone in the middle of an empty field in an old region of southern Europe, has no name on any map. Locals call it the Hollow Watcher, to others it's the Echo Tower, but not because of what it does, but because of what it doesn't. It doesn't echo. Not your voice, not your footsteps, not even the sound of your hands clapping. And if you shine a light into its base at night, they say it seems to disappear into something darker than shadow. The tower is made of black stone, but not a single type of stone that geologists can agree on. Some claim it's of basalt. Others say it behaves more like compacted volcanic glass. Still others say it's not stone at all, but something synthetic, something old. But before we go deeper into the tower itself, it's worth asking, why does the air around it feel wrong? Because this isn't just a matter of strange acoustics, it's not a quirky architectural anomaly. There are plenty of those, cathedrals with echo chambers, domes with whisper corridors, but this structure absorbs sound in ways even modern anechoic chambers can't reproduce. Scientists who visited the site in the 1980s brought sensitive sound equipment. Their goal was simple: determine whether the tower's geometry was causing the acoustic anomaly. What they found, though, shook them. The equipment picked up disturbances, faint pulses in the air that weren't wind, weren't heat, and weren't seismic. Instead of bouncing back signals, the walls seemed to take them in like a sponge for vibration. Even shouting inside the tower produces nothing. Not a low echo, not a delay, just nothing. Somewhere along the base, there's a seam in the stone, a slight slit, almost like a door, but no hinge, no handle, no sign of how it opens. No one's ever seen inside. Now you might say, maybe it's just an illusion, maybe it's clever design, but the animals avoid it. Bats don't fly near it, birds don't nest on it, even rats keep away. The grass around it stops growing a few feet before the base. It's like the earth too wants no part of what's inside. In 1937, a linguist named Elian Turgano visited the tower with a priest, who claimed the structure was older than language. Turgano had spent decades studying dead dialects and symbols, but what struck him about the tower was not what it said, but what it suggested. Near the top of the tower, carved in bands, are what appear to be grooves, decorative to some, but to Turgano they looked like a pattern, a repeating sequence, not just a design but a signal. He described it as a rhythm in stone, something like a waveform frozen in physical form. He wondered, was this tower not made for human ears at all? Others have made similar observations. There are reports, unconfirmed but persistent, of tones being heard in the minds of some visitors, subtle like humming, just below the threshold of awareness, not audible in the air, but sensed in the bones. There's a theory, fringe, yes, but oddly hard to dismiss, that the tower was not designed to echo human voices, but to capture something else entirely. Some believe it's a listening device, but not for us. They suggest it was meant to receive something, a signal, a message, maybe from space, maybe from beneath the earth, maybe from a time before us. There's an older theory, passed around in old books that no university catalogs anymore, that says the tower stands over a seam in the world, a soft spot where the layers between what's above and what's below begin to fold. In this version of the story, the tower was placed there not to attract sound but to stop it, to act as a cap, a muffler, a kind of ancient plug over something that must never be awakened by resonance. Sound, after all, is vibration, and vibration can wake sleeping things. This theory emerged from a manuscript found in an abandoned monastery 70 kilometers from the site. In it, a monk described a pillar of black silence that keeps the hunger below from hearing the living above. Is this poetic metaphor? Probably, but it raises a question that's lingered over the tower for centuries. What happens if you break the silence? In 1991, a team of independent researchers brought an ultrasonic pulse generator to the site. They wanted to map the inside of the tower using sound like sonar, but their equipment stopped functioning as soon as they approached the base. Not broke, not fried, it just shut off. Every time. Some tried to force an entry. In 2003, a group using diamond drills attempted to bore a hole into the wall. The drills burned out in minutes. The walls, when chipped, appeared to heal slowly over days, like some type of compression memory foam, but made of mineral. One chipped fragment was taken for analysis. Under the microscope, it revealed no crystalline structure. It wasn't a mineral in the traditional sense. It had layers, but not geological ones. Some claim it's a type of metamaterial, structured to redirect energy in non-natural ways. Think of stealth technology, but ancient, primitive in appearance, advanced in function. And still, no one has ever been inside. Yet there are stories, always whispered, that say some people have heard the tower respond. Not with sound, but with visions, with symbols in their dreams. With a sense of being watched, of being remembered. One woman said she saw flashes of a city made of curves, not angles. A place with no corners, no shadows, only flowing lines of silver and blue. She said the tower was a beacon, and that someone had long since stopped listening, but the signal still pulsed, waiting. Another visitor, a sound technician from Prague, claimed he placed a tuning fork on the base and struck it, and the fork never stopped ringing. Not once. He took it home, wrapped it in layers of cloth, metal and concrete. But even years later, he said, it still vibrated. A vibration without echo, without decay, like a memory that cannot die. If the tower is a machine, no one knows how to turn it on. If it's a relic, no one knows who left it. If it's alive, well, we wouldn't know what to listen for anyway. And that perhaps is what makes it so disturbing. Not the silence, but the feeling that silence is exactly what it wants. A silence that listens back. A door in the desert that leads to nowhere. Somewhere in a dry, wind-swept desert, far from any road, village, or known ruin, there is a door. It's not the kind you open. It has no handle, no hinges, no keyhole, and no mechanism that suggests it was ever meant to move. It's carved directly into the stone wall of a desert cliff, perfectly rectangular, smoothed flat, and aligned so precisely that even a credit card wouldn't slip into the seam. And yet, it doesn't lead anywhere, or at least not anymore. Locals don't talk much about it. Hikers sometimes stumble upon it by accident, confused by how out of place it looks, like something built for a purpose long forgotten, or maybe never finished at all. The surface surrounding it is worn only by wind. There are no inscriptions, no markings, no offerings, no sign of religious use, just this geometric shape, silent and waiting. What's strange isn't just that it's there, but that it looks intentional. Too intentional, like it wasn't shaped by erosion or some fluke of nature. Even geologists who have visited say it doesn't make sense. The rock in the area isn't particularly soft. The precision is too clean to be from ancient hand tools. But there's no trace of who carved it, when or why. No chisels, no debris, no campfire remains, no nearby settlement, just the door, alone. Some believe it could be a remnant of a lost civilization, one that lived and died long before known history began. Others think it might have been part of a tomb or sealed chamber that was buried behind the rock face over time. But ground scans show no hollow spaces inside. If it's hiding a chamber, it's completely sealed. Then there are those who go further. Some say it's not a door at all but a marker, a symbol placed intentionally to confuse, or perhaps to point to something hidden in plain sight. More fringe theories suggest it could be a portal of sorts, meant to open only under specific conditions, perhaps involving frequencies or star alignments, or unknown mechanisms long lost. One theory compares the desert door to similar anomalies around the world, like the Puerta de Hayumarca in Peru, or the Yonaguni Monument in Japan. Stone doors carved where no door should be. Always sealed, always silent. No writings, no context. Just the eerie suggestion that at some point someone or something put effort into designing these shapes with a purpose we no longer understand. Satellite images of the area don't help much either. The surrounding terrain shows no unusual disturbances, no collapsed structures, no signs of roads or ancient paths. Yet the door remains, as if it's the only thing that survived from something far older. Some spiritual seekers claim they've meditated beside it and heard strange hums. Others say devices fail when placed too close. Phones shut off, compasses go haywire. Though these stories are mostly anecdotal, they add to the door's myth. Could it be a psychological effect? Or is there something hidden, just beyond what modern tools can detect? There was once an expedition that tried to drill into the stone beside the door, hoping to uncover what was behind it. But after several hours, their tools began to overheat. One reportedly cracked, the project was abandoned, funding ran dry, and the desert took the site back into silence. The stone is unassuming in color, sandy gray, slightly red at the base. But when the sun hits it at dusk, the door seems to glow faintly around its edges. Not from any material, it's just the way the light catches the groove. Yet even that is enough to unnerve visitors. It gives the sense that the door is not just part of the cliff, but waiting to be noticed. And still, no one has stepped through. There's nothing to open, no space to pass into, no echo from knocking. Just the cold silence of the desert, brushing over its surface, like time itself has forgotten why it was made. Maybe it's a monument to something ancient, a placeholder for something that never came, or a warning, carved and left behind by people who once knew what was waiting on the other side. We may never know, but the desert door remains. The telescope aimed at nothing for 800 years. They say some monuments are built to remember, and some are built to be remembered. But then there are a rare few built quietly. For no glory, no recognition, no legacy. Just built to reach. And this is the story of one such thing. A telescope, standing alone for over 800 years, pointed at nothing. Or so they thought. It was found in a forgotten hilltop in southern Europe. A circular stone structure, weathered by centuries of wind and silence. There were no signs, no markings, nothing to explain its purpose. Most thought it was an old watchtower or part of a monastery. But tucked into the heart of the upper chamber was a tube of polished wood, held in place by a metal ring, aged and dulled by time. A telescope, simple, ancient, unmoving, but still perfectly intact. No one could say when it was placed there, no written records mentioned it, no one alive knew of it, and yet when they looked through it, it was still aligned. Not by accident, not roughly, but with purpose, precision. As though the people who built it had known exactly where it needed to face, and then left it untouched for nearly a millennium. At first, astronomers who studied it were puzzled. The telescope didn't appear to be directed toward anything important. Just a patch of dark sky, mostly empty. Nothing notable, nothing mapped, but they ran calculations anyway. The orientation was far too exact to be random. What they found changed the story. That tiny forgotten piece of sky, once thought empty, had only recently revealed itself. In the past few years, thanks to powerful space telescopes, scientists had identified a faint star in that direction. A star with a confirmed exoplanet orbiting it. A rocky world within its star's habitable zone. A planet that just might, be capable of life. And the old telescope, built 8 centuries earlier, was aimed right at it. Pause here for a moment, let that settle. A telescope, built in a time when people thought the stars were fixed lights in a perfect dome. When the known universe ended, just beyond the clouds. When the Earth was believed to be the center of everything. In that world, someone had pointed this lens to a star invisible to the naked eye, and left it. No one can say how they did it, whether by accident, by intuition, or by some understanding we've long since lost. Maybe they didn't know what they were looking at. Maybe they weren't looking for anything at all. But the fact remains. 800 years ago, a group of unknown builders locked eyes, so to speak, with a planet we didn't even know existed until the last decade. It humbles you, doesn't it? To think of all the centuries this telescope spent, alone, watching that same patch of sky, through storms and snow, through seasons and silence, through empires rising and falling, through wars and peace, and all the noise of human history. It waited quietly, faithfully, looking. And the people who made it, they're all gone. Dust now, names forgotten, their tools rusted, their language lost. But their gesture remains. Their curiosity remains. And maybe that's all it ever needed to be. Not a tool for discovery, not even an object of use, but a symbol of longing, of looking upward, of believing there's more beyond what we can touch. Imagine them for a moment, the builders, standing under a night sky lit only by stars. No electricity, no noise, just silence and cold and breath. Maybe they weren't scholars, maybe they weren't scientists, maybe they were farmers or monks or travelers who noticed something strange in the heavens one night and couldn't shake the feeling that it mattered. They built this with their hands, stone by stone. They aligned it with care. And when it was done, they didn't write about it, they didn't carve their names, they just left it. Maybe they stood there for a moment watching the sky through their lens. Or maybe they never used it at all. Maybe the building itself was the act, the offering. And then centuries passed. Winds covered the hill in grass. Trees grew around it. People forgot the stories. The telescope remained alone, facing a future it would never see until now. There's a quiet sadness in that, but also a deep beauty. Because we often think of ancient knowledge as primitive, as limited, as naive. But sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes it was simply quiet, gentle, intuitive. It didn't always need equations or explanations. Sometimes it was just a feeling, a pull toward something greater, a willingness to build for reasons you couldn't name. And now, all these years later, we find ourselves looking at the same star, with satellites and digital cameras and spectral analysis. But part of me thinks that telescope already knew what we're still trying to understand. Not because it had data, but because someone dared to point it there in the first place. It reminds us that wonder doesn't need answers. Sometimes it only needs attention. So tonight, when you look up at the stars, remember that old telescope. Remember that its makers stood where you stand. Wondered as you wonder, reached as you reach. They didn't ask for reward. They didn't expect recognition. They simply looked. And in doing so, they left behind a bridge. A quiet, invisible thread between their time and ours. Between their dreams and our discoveries. And now, that thread stretches even further, into the night, into the unknown, into the mystery of that distant planet glowing faintly in the dark. Maybe one day we'll reach it. Maybe we won't. But that's not the point. The point is, someone believed it was worth looking toward, even when there was nothing to see. And maybe that's what it means to be human. A structure that registers on no radar. There's a quiet patch of land in the highlands of Central Asia. Nothing around for miles. No cities. No military bases. Just wide open earth, wind, and sky. But for decades pilots have whispered about something strange they've flown over. A shape, a form, a structure, clearly visible through the cockpit glass. But when checked on the radar, nothing. Not even a blip. It first came to attention in the late 1970s during a routine survey flight by an experienced Soviet pilot. He was flying low over the region to photograph terrain patterns when he noticed what looked like a large stone pavilion in the middle of an empty plateau. Large enough to cast a shadow. Yet when he radioed coordinates back to base and asked for confirmation, the technicians saw only flat terrain. No signature. No elevation shift. Nothing. He even circled the structure twice. Confused, the cameras picked it up. But every radar system stayed blank. That was the beginning. Since then, scattered reports have emerged from reconnaissance flights, explorers, and even satellite footage. The structure is always described the same way. It appears to be made from a pale stone, weathered, but clearly artificial. Square base, tapering edges, a spire-like extension that reaches upward at a slight tilt. Some compare it to an old astronomical instrument. Others say it resembles a forgotten temple, but without any door, windows, or signs of entry. Most strange of all is the way it seems to absorb signal. People have tried approaching it directly, but here's where the mystery deepens. No exact GPS coordinates ever align with visual reports. Images captured by drones show the standing, but when researchers try to visit the spot on foot, nothing is there. The ground appears undisturbed. No foundations, no markings, just rocks, moss, and wild grass. Some theorize it only becomes visible from certain altitudes or angles, that it's cloaked in some natural or unnatural field that bends light or perception. Then there's the equipment failure. Multiple expeditions report that drones lose connection within 500 meters, compasses drift, audio cuts out, and in one chilling case, a researcher lost time. He recorded over an hour of missing memory while hiking toward the area. His watch said 90 minutes had passed. But his own voice log showed only a 10-minute entry before static took over. Scientists have attempted to use LiDAR and high-resolution radar mapping to pinpoint the structure, but every pass, even those directly above the location, returns nothing but blank terrain. It's become one of the only documented places on Earth where human eyes can see an object and machines cannot. No electromagnetic signature, no heat variation, no sound reflection. Even military-grade sensors come up empty. What is it made of? If it's truly stone, how does it block radio waves, sonar, and even advanced scanners? And if it's not made of stone, what kind of material looks ancient but behaves like nothing we know? A few archaeologists suggest it may be something far older than human civilization. A remnant not of our past, but of something parallel. Not alien necessarily, but of an origin we can't place. There are whispers of similar sightings from other parts of the world. A small obelisk, seen in the Andes that cast no shadow at noon. A coastal pillar in Greenland photographed in the 1960s, but never found again. Even a segment of a Chinese manuscript from the Ming Dynasty describes a silent tower, visible only under moonlight. The descriptions match. One theory suggests the structure isn't really in our dimension, not fully. That it exists halfway between physical presence and something more elusive, like a projected form. A resonant image from another layer of reality. That would explain why our senses sometimes catch it, but our machines can't. But even that theory has problems. Because this structure doesn't flicker. It doesn't appear transparent or ghostly. Everyone who's seen it with their own eyes says the same thing. It looks real, solid, permanent, like it's been standing for centuries. Weathered, sunlit, grounded. One pilot said it was as real as the wing under my seat, but no instrument he had could verify it. There's also something about how it feels to those who witness it. Many describe a strange stillness, as if time slows down, as if sound itself pulls away. One explorer, who snapped a clear photo of it in 2009, said she felt like the air was thicker around it. She reported shortness of breath, even though the altitude wasn't high enough to cause that. Her dog refused to move toward it, just sat down and whined. So what do we make of a place like this? A structure that can be seen but not measured? That doesn't echo, doesn't reflect, doesn't leave any footprint except in our memories and photographs. It forces us to question what counts as real. If something evades every test, but still shows up in our eyes and minds, do we doubt it? Or do we consider that our machines might be limited in ways we haven't realized? Not all truths can be weighed or mapped, and not every mystery gives us the courtesy of evidence. Some just stand there, motionless, invisible, and persistent like the structure, waiting for someone to understand how to see it the right way.